The staff at Bordeaux Hall moved with practiced elegance, but beneath their polished veneer, panic rippled like an electric current. Crystal glasses were adjusted a third time. White tablecloths smoothed obsessively. The executive chef barked orders with unusual sharpness, his normally confident voice now clipped with tension. "She's coming," whispered Anna, the hostess clutching her reservation book until her knuckles whitened. The three words spread through the restaurant like a winter chill. Servers exchanged glances of dread, their eyes darting toward the front entrance between tasks. Martin, the restaurant manager, pulled Anna aside, his voice low and urgent. "Is everything perfect for Miss Harrington's table? The 82 Bordeaux is breathing, the special china is set." "Yes, everything's exactly as she specified," Anna replied, though her trembling hands betrayed her confidence. "Table 12, corner position, southern exposure, no draft." And the last server who disappointed her was fired on the spot. Martin reminded, straightening his already impeccable tie. "Victoria Harrington doesn't tolerate mistakes." The sommelier approached, perspiration beading his forehead despite the restaurant's carefully controlled temperature. "The wine is ready, but is it the right vintage? The 82 was exceptional, but what if she prefers the 79 tonight? Should we have both ready?" Martin closed his eyes briefly, summoning calm he didn't feel. "Both. Definitely both. And have the 86 as backup." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a sleek black Bentley pulled to the curb. The valet rushed forward, his movements stiff with anticipation. The restaurant collectively held its breath. In the far corner of Bordeaux Hall, Robert Morgan sat alone at table 14, unaware of the approaching storm. His calloused hands rested lightly on the pristine tablecloth, the skin rough from years of honest work. The single glass of water before him remained untouched, as if he feared making even that small impression on such an elegant setting. His navy button-down shirt was clean and pressed, the collar slightly frayed from too many washes. The watch on his wrist, a simple Timex with a worn leather band, had been a gift from Jennifer on their 10th anniversary, 4 months before the diagnosis that changed everything. Robert checked the time again, feeling the familiar weight of memory as his finger traced the watch's scratched face. 4 years had passed since he'd held Jennifer's hand as she slipped away, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. 4 years of bedtime stories told in a voice that fought to stay steady. 4 years of school lunches packed with notes tucked inside. 4 years of being both father and mother to a little girl who still sometimes cried for the woman neither of them would ever stop missing. He straightened his shoulders, remembering why he'd agreed to this dinner in the first place. His friend Dave had been relentless. "You've got more practical knowledge than those college boys with fancy degrees," Dave had insisted last week over beers in Robert's modest backyard. "Your problem is nobody who matters has seen what you can do. You need to meet the right people, shake the right hands." Robert had laughed then, gesturing to his weathered work boots. "People like that don't see people like me, Dave. They look right through us." Dave had pushed the business card across the table anyway. A client of his from the insurance company. Someone connected, someone who might need a skilled facilities manager for their new development project. "Just one dinner, Rob, for Abby's sake. You keep saying you want to give her more than you have now." That had been the clincher. Abby, 9 years old, with her mother's eyes and a smile that could break his heart with its hopefulness. Abby, who needed braces they couldn't afford on his maintenance supervisor's salary. Abby, who deserved more than their small 2-bedroom apartment and secondhand clothes. A memory surfaced sharp and clear as spring water. Jennifer, in the hospital bed, her once vibrant body now fragile as tissue paper. Her fingers cool against his cheek as she made him promise. "Don't let bitterness steal the joy from her life, Rob, or from yours." Robert blinked away the image, focusing instead on the elegant restaurant around him. The kind of place where a glass of wine cost more than his hourly wage, where people with power and influence made decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever getting their hands dirty. The maitre d' approached his table, the man's expression professionally neutral, though his eyes revealed momentary confusion at Robert's presence among the restaurant's usual clientele. "Sir, your party hasn't arrived yet." Robert glanced at his watch again. "Not yet. Should be any minute." "Very good, sir. May I bring you something while you wait? Perhaps a cocktail or an appetizer?" Robert thought of the carefully budgeted amount in his wallet. "Just water is fine, thanks." The maitre d' nodded and retreated, leaving Robert alone again with his thoughts. Through the window beside him, the city lights glittered beautiful and distant, like opportunities that always seemed just beyond his reach. Outside Bordeaux Hall, the black Bentley's door opened, and Victoria Harrington emerged like a force of nature. Tall and striking at 42, she moved with the confidence of someone who commanded rooms before speaking a single word. Her tailored charcoal suit, Armani custom cut to her precise measurements, cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Diamond studs winked from her ears, their simplicity only emphasizing their exceptional quality. Victoria handed her keys to the valet without looking at him. Her attention already focused on her phone, where emails continued to demand responses even at this hour. The young man nervously dropped the keys, fumbling to retrieve them from the pavement. Victoria's gaze flicked toward him, briefly cold and assessing. That's a $50,000 vehicle. Perhaps handling it requires more competence than you currently possess. The valet's face flushed crimson. I'm so sorry, Miss Harrington. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't? Her voice carried the practiced precision of someone who had long ago mastered making people uncomfortable with minimal effort. As Victoria approached the entrance, her mind calculated outcomes and contingencies, a perpetual spreadsheet of risk assessment and strategic planning. Tonight's dinner with Jonathan Peters from Pioneer Investments could secure the additional funding needed to acquire Stellaris Technologies, the final piece she needed to complete her 5-year expansion plan. The restaurant doors opened before she reached them, Martin rushing forward with a rigid smile. Ms. Harrington, welcome back to Bordeaux Hall. Your table is ready, of course. Victoria nodded curtly, handing her cashmere coat to the waiting hostess. She surveyed the restaurant with the same critical eye that had evaluated countless boardrooms and business proposals. Nothing escaped her notice, not the slightly uneven flower arrangement near the bar, not the couple in the center who spoke too loudly, not the solitary man in the corner whose clothes marked him as obviously out of place. As Martin led her toward her usual table, Victoria's mind momentarily drifted to a scene from 15 years earlier. A cramped apartment with secondhand furniture. The smell of burned coffee as she worked through the night, developing the algorithm that would eventually become the foundation of Harrington Technologies. The letter from her fiancé Richard, left on the kitchen counter beside her, emptied bank account statements. Your obsession with success is pathological. I've found someone who understands the meaning of balance. 2 weeks later, she discovered he'd also taken her preliminary patent applications to her competitor. The betrayal had been complete, personal and professional, love and livelihood, all in one calculated strike. That night, alone in the darkened apartment, Victoria had made herself a promise. Never again would she be vulnerable. Never again would she put faith in anything except her own intellect and determination. Never again would she mistake kindness for strength. The memory hardened her expression as she followed Martin through the restaurant. When they reached her reserved table, Victoria stopped abruptly. The angle was wrong, the lighting too harsh, the proximity to the kitchen doors unacceptable. This isn't my usual table, she stated, her tone making it clear that explanations would be insufficient. Martin's professional composure cracked slightly. I'm terribly sorry, Ms. Harrington. There must have been some confusion with the reservation system. Your usual table is table 12, but what? Victoria's gaze was unflinching. We had a water pipe issue near that section earlier today. Martin explained, sweat now visible at his temples. Maintenance assured us it's repaired, but we thought perhaps the noise was... I don't pay premium prices for substandard accommodations. Victoria interrupted. My guest will be arriving shortly, and I require the proper setting. Her eyes scanned the restaurant, settling on the corner table where Robert sat alone. That table, it has the appropriate lighting and privacy. Martin's face paled. Table 14 is currently occupied, Ms. Harrington. Then unoccupy it. Victoria began walking toward Robert's table without waiting for a response, her heels striking the marble floor with decisive precision. Behind her, Martin followed, murmuring desperate apologies. Robert looked up as they approached, immediately noting the woman's authoritative presence and the manager's obvious distress. The restaurant had grown strangely quiet, ambient conversation dimming, as if someone had gradually turned down the volume. Victoria stopped directly beside his table, her gaze coolly appraising. This table is more suitable for my meeting. The management will happily relocate you to accommodate my reservation. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact delivered with the certainty of someone unaccustomed to refusal. For a moment, Robert simply looked at her, taking in the expensive suit, the perfect posture, the absolute confidence that her needs automatically superseded his own. In that moment, Robert thought of his daughter Abby asking him why some kids at school had new sneakers, while she wore second-hand ones from the thrift store. He remembered his careful explanation about different families having different resources, but how that didn't make anyone better or worse, just different. He thought about the values he worked so hard to instill in her, treating others with dignity, regardless of their status, standing firm when it mattered, choosing kindness even when it wasn't convenient. Robert responded with a calm that came from facing far worse crises than an entitled executive. Ma'am, I'm waiting for someone important. I was seated here because I specifically requested a quiet corner. But he gestured to the empty chair across from him. You're welcome to share the table if you'd like. Victoria's expression flickered with momentary surprise before settling back into cool displeasure. People didn't say no to her, especially not men wearing off-the-rack shirts with frayed collars. Perhaps I wasn't clear, she continued, her voice lowering slightly. I'm Victoria Harrington, CEO of Harrington Technologies. I have a critically important business dinner, and this location is ideal for my purposes. The name registered with Robert. Even someone disconnected from the corporate world recognized Victoria Harrington, whose face had graced business magazines and whose ruthless acquisition strategies were legendary. The woman was worth billions, had buildings named after her, could probably buy this entire restaurant on a whim. Still, Robert didn't move. I understand who you are, Ms. Harrington, but I also understand that my meeting is important too, at least to me and my daughter. I was here first, and I'd appreciate the same courtesy I'd show anyone else. The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Staff stood frozen against walls, watching the unprecedented confrontation unfold. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. Do you have any idea what my time is worth? What decisions affecting thousands of jobs happen during dinners like the one I'm about to have? Robert met her gaze directly. I imagine quite a lot, and I respect that, but respect goes both ways regardless of who's giving or receiving it. Something in his steady tone, not argumentative, not intimidated, simply matter-of-fact, caught Victoria off guard. People typically responded to her in one of two ways: obsequious agreement or defensive hostility. This man offered neither. Martin interjected desperately. Ms. Harrington, we could prepare the private dining room upstairs immediately. It would offer even more privacy for your meeting. Victoria didn't acknowledge the suggestion, her attention fixed on Robert. After a calculated pause, she made a decision that surprised even herself. With deliberate grace, she pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down. Then we'll share, she stated as if it had been her idea all along. My guests will be joining shortly. The collective tension in the restaurant released slightly, though conversations resumed at a more subdued volume. Martin signaled frantically to the staff, who scrambled to adjust to this unexpected development. Robert watched as Victoria arranged herself precisely in the chair, placing her phone face up on the table, her movements efficient and controlled. She looked at him properly for the first time, her assessment clinical and thorough. Since we'll be sharing space, perhaps introductions are in order, though you apparently already know who I am. Robert Morgan. I supervise maintenance operations for Westridge Properties. Victoria's slight grimace revealed exactly what she thought of his occupation. Fixing leaky faucets and changing light bulbs. How essential. The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. Robert could have let it slide, could have shrunk beneath her obvious disdain. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. Last month, I identified a critical failure in a primary electrical system at Mercy Hospital before it could affect their operating rooms. 3 surgeries were in progress at the time. I've designed backup systems that have prevented catastrophic failures during power outages, implemented preventative maintenance protocols that have saved companies millions, and trained teams that keep buildings functioning safely when most people don't even think about what's happening behind their walls. He paused, his expression unchanged. But yes, I also fix leaky faucets and change light bulbs. Victoria raised an eyebrow, mildly intrigued despite herself. Defensive about your profession, Mr. Morgan. Not defensive, just accurate. There's dignity in work that keeps things running even when it's invisible to most people. A servant approached, tentatively placing a glass of water before Victoria. Would you care to see the wine list, Miss Harrington? Bring the 82 Bordeaux. 2 glasses. She didn't look away from Robert as she issued the command. After the server hurried away, Victoria studied Robert with the same intensity she might examine a puzzling financial report. So tell me, Mr. Fix-It, what brings you to an establishment where the entrees cost more than your hourly wage? The question was deliberately provocative, designed to remind him of the disparity in their positions. Robert recognized the tactic he'd encountered similar attempts at intimidation from property developers who assumed his practical knowledge made him intellectually inferior. A business meeting same as you. I was recommended for a facilities director position for a new development project. Victoria's lips curved in a mirthless smile. Ambitious, moving up from changing light bulbs to supervising others who change light bulbs. We all work within the systems available to us, Ms. Harrington. I'm sure even you started somewhere less impressive than where you are now. Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a momentary crack in her polished facade. The server returned with wine, pouring 2 glasses with practiced precision. Victoria took hers immediately, taking a measured sip. My first office was my kitchen table in a 1-bedroom apartment in Dorchester, she stated flatly. I slept 3 hours a night while coding the algorithm that became Harrington Technology's first patent. So yes, Mr. Morgan, I started somewhere less impressive. The difference is I refused to stay there. Robert nodded, acknowledging her achievement without being cowed by it. That's impressive. Building something from nothing takes remarkable determination. Victoria hadn't expected acknowledgement, and the absence of either envy or resentment in his tone momentarily disarmed her. Before she could respond, her phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening. It seems my dinner companion has been delayed. A situation at his office requires his attention. Her tone made it clear what she thought of such inefficiency. Robert's phone remained silent. He checked his watch again, concern beginning to furrow his brow. Yours as well, Victoria asked, noting his gesture. Looks that way. Mine's already 20 minutes late. Unprofessional. I never tolerate tardiness from my executives. Time is the one resource that can never be replaced. Robert smiled slightly. My daughter says I'm too punctual. It embarrasses her when we're the first to arrive at school functions. You have a child, Victoria asked the question automatic rather than interested. Abby, she's 9. Smart as they come, stubborn as her mother was. The past tense registered with Victoria. Was. Robert's expression remained steady, though something deep in his eyes shifted. Cancer, 4 years ago. It's been just Abby and me since then. Victoria had prepared for many conversational scenarios this evening, financial projections, acquisition strategies, market analyses, but not this simple statement of loss delivered without self-pity. It disrupted her practiced rhythm, leaving an unexpected silence that she found herself unwilling to fill with platitudes. That must be challenging, she finally offered the word, immediately feeling inadequate. It is, but we manage. Robert's straightforward response carried the quiet strength of someone who had faced something far more devastating than an intimidating dinner companion. The server approached again. Would you care to order appetizers while waiting for your guests? Victoria gestured dismissively. I'll wait. Robert hesitated, clearly calculating something in his mind. I'll try the soup, please. After the server departed, Victoria's attention returned to Robert. So this job you're interviewing for, I assume it offers better compensation than your current position. About 30% more plus better health benefits. Abby needs braces, and our current insurance only covers part of it. Victoria frowned slightly. You made a significant career decision based on your daughter's dental work. I make most significant decisions based on what is best for Abby. The concept seemed foreign to Victoria, whose decisions were calculated on projected returns, market positioning, and strategic advantage. Personal considerations were variables to be managed, not foundational principles. And what about your own ambitions? Surely you have goals beyond paying for orthodontia. Robert considered the question with genuine thought. I'm good at what I do. I understand systems, how they work, how they fail, how to make them better. In my field, that translates to creating safer buildings, more efficient energy usage, better working environments. Those things matter even if they don't make headlines. Victoria's expression reveals skepticism. Noble sentiments, but ultimately limited. Real impact requires scale. I employ over 5,000 people. My decisions affect global markets. Different kinds of impact, that's all. Last year, I redesigned the HVAC system in a senior living facility that was making residents sick. Doesn't affect the stock market, but it mattered to those 87 people. The server returned with Robert's soup, a simple French onion with melted Gruyere. The aroma momentarily distracted Victoria from her response, reminding her she hadn't eaten since a hastily consumed protein bar at noon. Robert noticed her glance. Would you like to try it? It's excellent. The offer surprised her. Most people in his position would be intimidated into silence by now, not offering to share their food. I'll order my own if I want soup, Mr. Morgan. He shrugged, unbothered by her curtness. Just being polite. Politeness is often inefficient, but usually worth the time it takes, Robert countered, beginning his soup with measured appreciation. Victoria watched him for a moment, struck by his apparent comfort despite their obvious disparity in status. Most men she encountered either wanted something from her, feared her, or both. Robert Morgan seemed to do neither. You mentioned your daughter is stubborn like her mother. I assume that means you're the reasonable one. The question emerged with unexpected lightness, almost conversational rather than strategic. Robert smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. Jennifer would have said, I'm the stubborn one. Probably why we worked so well together, mutual respect for each other's particular brand of determination. And you were married how long? 11 years, would have been 15 this April. Victoria found herself calculating timelines. So your daughter was 5 when she lost her mother. Robert nodded, a shadow crossing his features. Too young to understand why the person who tucked her in at night suddenly wasn't there anymore. Children are resilient, Victoria offered, the phrase automatic and detached. They are, but resilience isn't the same as not hurting. Abby adapted, but there are still nights she cries for her mom. Robert set down his spoon, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. You mentioned starting your company at your kitchen table. Family support through that process. The unexpected redirection caught Victoria off guard. People rarely asked her personal questions, and when they did, it was usually calculated flattery or strategic information gathering. No, quite the opposite, in fact. How so? Victoria found herself responding before considering whether she wanted to share this information. My brother sold my initial algorithm to a competitor while I was still refining the patent application. My fiancée emptied our joint accounts the same week. Apparently, my obsession with success made me difficult to live with. She delivered the facts with clinical detachment, as if reading from someone else's biography. Yet something in Robert's attentive silence made the familiar story feel suddenly raw again, the professional gloss momentarily stripped away. That's a hell of a betrayal, Robert said simply, by the people who should have had your back. The absence of pity in his tone, the straightforward acknowledgement without judgment, cracked something in Victoria's carefully maintained composure. Words tumbled out unbidden. It was educational. I learned early that affection is just a mask for opportunism. Family, friends, romantic partners, they all turn when money is involved. They all take. I built my company, understanding that loyalty is a business transaction, nothing more. Robert considered her words, taking another spoonful of soup before responding. That's one interpretation of what happened to you. But defining everyone by your worst experiences, that's a choice, not a fact. Victoria's eyes narrowed. A choice based on empirical evidence. My brother now works for my chief competitor. My ex-fiancée managed to secure a position on my board through shareholder manipulation. Every relationship I've had since has confirmed the pattern. People want proximity to success, not connection to the person behind it. I won't pretend to know your life, Robert acknowledged. But I do know that building walls high enough to keep out pain also keeps out everything worth living for. Trust me. I tried that road after Jennifer died. It protects you from nothing except happiness. The statement hung between them, unexpectedly personal. Victoria felt an unfamiliar discomfort, not the irritation she typically experienced when challenged, but something deeper and less definable. That's a convenient philosophy for someone who hasn't had to protect billions in assets and thousands of jobs from people who would dismantle them for short-term profit. She countered, her tone sharpening defensively. Fair point. Different stakes, different risks, Robert conceded. But I wonder if the price of your protection is worth what you are paying for it. Meaning, you've built an empire that's apparently secure from everyone who might threaten it. But sitting across from you, I don't see someone who's enjoying the fruits of that victory. Victoria stiffened, unused to being the subject of such direct assessment. You presume to psychoanalyze me based on a 20-minute conversation, rather bold for a maintenance supervisor. Not psychoanalysis, just observation. Robert's calm remained unshaken by her sudden coldness. And before you dismiss the observation based on my job title, remember that my work requires identifying problems before they become catastrophic. Sometimes that means noticing patterns others miss. For a moment, Victoria simply looked at him, recalibrating her approach. This man wasn't following any of the expected scripts. He wasn't intimidated by her status, wasn't fishing for advantage, wasn't backing down from her attempt to dismiss him. It was unsettling. You speak about trust and connection as if they're universal constants, she finally said. But in my experience, they're luxuries afforded to those with nothing valuable enough to steal. Robert set down his spoon, having finished his soup. His expression remained thoughtful rather than argumentative. After Jennifer died, there were days I wanted to give in to bitterness. It would have been easy to decide the world was cruel, that nothing good could last. Some mornings, just getting out of bed felt impossible. He paused, his gaze steady on Victoria. But every time I looked at Abby, I knew I didn't have the luxury of that kind of thinking. She needed a father who could show her that even when life breaks your heart, there's still kindness worth believing in. There's still hope worth holding on to. Victoria felt an unexpected tightness in her throat, quickly masked by reaching for her wine. A noble sentiment for a greeting card, Mr. Morgan. But we live in a world of balance sheets and bottom lines, not fairy tales about the inherent goodness of humanity. We live in both, actually, Robert replied. The mistake is thinking we have to choose one over the other. Their conversation was interrupted as Victoria's phone vibrated again. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening. My dinner guest has canceled entirely. An unexpected conflict that couldn't be resolved. Her tone made it clear what she thought of such inefficiency. Apparently, Pioneer Investments will have to wait until next week to discuss their potential participation in my acquisition of Stellaris Technologies. She looked up to find Robert checking his watch again with growing concern. Yours hasn't arrived either. No, and he's not responding to messages. Not like Dave to be this late without communication. Victoria took another sip of her wine, a decision forming. Since we find ourselves unexpectedly available, Mr. Morgan, perhaps we should order. It seems wasteful to abandon a reservation at Bordeaux Hall, especially since you have only had soup. Robert hesitated, clearly weighing financial considerations. I appreciate the offer, but I'll cover it, Victoria stated matter-of-factly. Consider it compensation for the table-sharing inconvenience. That's not necessary. I'm aware it's not necessary. I'm stating a preference for continuing our conversation over a proper meal rather than ending it prematurely. Robert studied her for a moment, recognizing the attempt at control wrapped in the invitation. Yet beneath it he sensed something genuine, and a rare moment of unscripted curiosity from someone whose life was likely planned to the minute. All right, but I insist on leaving the tip. Victoria raised an eyebrow, amused despite herself. The maintenance supervisor wants to tip on a billionaire's dinner tab. Your pride is showing, Mr. Morgan. Maybe so, but principles don't change based on who's at the table. The server approached with menus, clearly surprised to find the two still seated together. Victoria ordered with precision the seared scallops dressing on the side, no starches. Robert chose the roast chicken, the most reasonably priced entree that would still allow him to leave a proper tip. As the server departed, Victoria returned to their interrupted thread. You were explaining your philosophy of maintaining optimism, despite evidence to the contrary. A charming perspective, if somewhat detached from reality. Not optimism exactly, more like choosing what kind of person I want to be, regardless of circumstances. Robert considered his next words carefully. When my wife was dying, she made me promise something. She said, "Don't let bitterness steal the joy from Abby's life or from yours." At the time, I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. Some days I'm still not sure. Victoria found herself unexpectedly engaged the usual calculations and strategies that filled her mind temporarily quieted. And how does one fulfill such a promise, particularly when life provides ample evidence for bitterness? By making choices every day, small ones usually, like whether to assume the worst about people or to give them the chance to surprise you, whether to focus on what you've lost or what remains. Victoria's expression revealed skepticism. That sounds remarkably like choosing comfortable delusions over uncomfortable realities. Or maybe it's recognizing that our experiences shape our perception of reality, but they don't have to define it completely. Their entrees arrived momentarily pausing the conversation. Victoria cut her scallops with precise movements, her posture perfect, even while dining. Robert's approach was equally careful but less rehearsed, a man accustomed to simple meals elevated by necessity rather than habit. "You mentioned your ex-fiancé has a position on your board," Robert said after a few bites. "That must create interesting dynamics at meetings." Victoria's surprise at the direct question registered briefly before her composure returned. "Marcus serves as Chief Operations Officer. His usefulness outweighs my personal distaste for his presence. That requires significant compartmentalization. Business often does. Emotions are inefficient in decision-making to context." Robert considered this. Necessary sometimes, I agree. But eliminating emotions entirely means losing valuable information. They're data too, just of a different kind. Victoria found herself genuinely curious about his perspective, a rarity in her interactions. "Explain." "Well, take your situation. The fact that you distrust your COO is emotional, yes, but it's based on his past behavior. That distrust is actually valuable information about his character that pure financial metrics might miss." Victoria had never considered the matter from that angle. Her approach had always been to ruthlessly suppress personal feelings in professional contexts, viewing them as weaknesses to be overcome rather than potentially useful indicators. An intriguing perspective, if somewhat unorthodox in corporate governance. Robert smiled slightly. "I doubt the Harvard Business Review will be calling for my management insights anytime soon." The self-deprecating comment delivered without bitterness struck Victoria as refreshingly authentic. The men in her usual circles, executives, investors, board members, were projected constant confidence, their rare admissions of limitation always carefully calculated for strategic effect. "So tell me about your daughter." Victoria found herself asking the question, emerging with genuine interest rather than social obligation. Robert's expression softened immediately. "Abby's amazing, too smart for her own good sometimes. Last month she decided our apartment needed better thermal efficiency, so she drafted plans to seal the windows with materials from my workshop. Didn't consult me first, just implemented her solution." Enterprising. That's one word for it. The super wasn't thrilled about the silicone caulk on the historic woodwork. His pride was evident despite the mishap. "She wants to be an engineer, spends hours with these construction sets building increasingly complicated structures. And you encourage this interest." "Every way I can. Her school's science program is decent but limited. I try to supplement with weekend projects, trips to the science museum when we can afford it." Victoria noted the financial constraint mentioned without self-pity, simply as a practical reality. There are several excellent scholarship programs for girls interested in STEM fields. "Has she applied?" "She's a bit young for most of them. The competitive ones start around middle school." "Not necessarily. The Harrington Foundation funds a program for elementary-aged girls with demonstrated aptitude. The application deadline for next year's cohort is next month." Robert looked up from his meal, surprised by the specific information. "I wasn't aware of that program." "Few are. We prefer to identify candidates through educator recommendations rather than open calls. It reduces the volume of applications to those with genuine potential and provides a nice filter for socioeconomic status in the process." Robert observed his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Victoria hadn't considered that implication, and the observation momentarily disrupted her practiced response. "That's not the intent." "Maybe not, But it's the effect. Teachers at underfunded schools have less time to identify special talents, let alone complete extra recommendation paperwork. Same reason Abby's school has one microscope for 30 kids, while private academies have fully equipped labs. Instead of dismissing his criticism, Victoria found herself considering it seriously. A valid point. Perhaps the Foundation's approach warrants reconsideration. Robert seemed surprised by her receptiveness. Most people in your position would have defended the status quo. I didn't build a technology empire by clinging to flawed systems when better alternatives were identified. Victoria stated this without arrogance, simply as fact. So, inefficiency irritates me whether in business processes or philanthropic ones. Their conversation continued through the meal, ranging from practical challenges in building maintenance to corporate governance philosophies to the merits of various educational approaches. Victoria found herself engaged in a way she rarely experienced in business dinners, where conversations were usually tactical maneuvers toward predetermined objectives. As they finished their entrees, Victoria studied Robert with renewed assessment. "You're unusual, Mr. Morgan." "How so?" "Most people in your position would be either resentful of wealth they don't possess or obsequious in hopes of gaining advantage. You're neither." Robert considered this. "Maybe because I don't measure success the same way you do. Don't get me wrong, money matters. It pays for Abby's braces and hopefully her college someday. But at the end of the day, I care more about being someone my daughter can respect than someone who can buy her whatever she wants." Victoria's expression remained neutral, though something in her eyes shifted. "And you believe those objectives are mutually exclusive?" "Not necessarily, but I've seen how pursuit of wealth and status can become the goal rather than the tool. When that happens, people tend to justify choices they'd never have made otherwise." The observation cut closer to Victoria's experience than she cared to admit. Her pursuit of corporate dominance had begun as a means of security, financial and emotional, after betrayal. But somewhere along the way, winning had become its own justification, the original purpose, subsumed by the machinery of ambition. A simplistic view of complex realities, she countered, though without her usual sharpness. "Maybe. But I've found that most important truths are pretty simple at their core. It's humans who complicate them with justifications." Victoria's phone vibrated again. She glanced at it briefly before silencing it entirely, a gesture she rarely made even in board meetings. "You speak with remarkable certainty for someone whose life experiences might justify considerable cynicism." Robert's expression softened slightly. "I'm not certain about much, honestly. Every morning I wonder if I'm doing right by Abby, if Jennifer would approve of my decisions, if I'm balancing work and fatherhood well enough." The admission of vulnerability surprised Victoria. The men in her world wore certainty like armor, admitting doubt only strategically, never authentically. "Then what guides your choices, if not certainty?" "Hope, I guess. Hope that kindness matters more than momentary advantage. Hope that showing up imperfectly is better than not showing up at all. Hope that Abby will remember how hard I tried, even when I failed." Victoria felt something unfamiliar stir within her, not quite recognition, but a distant echo of emotions long suppressed. Before she could formulate a response, the server approached with the dessert menu. "Would either of you care for dessert? Our chocolate souffle is particularly exceptional this evening." Victoria instinctively began to decline her usual practice in business dinners, where efficiency was paramount, but instead she glanced at Robert. "Mr. Morgan, would you care for dessert?" The question was offered with unexpected consideration, acknowledging his preferences rather than simply imposing her own. Robert checked his watch again. "I should probably get home to Abby. My neighbor watches her when I work late, but I try not to impose too often." Victoria nodded, signaling the server for the check instead. As they waited, an awkward silence descended, the natural conclusion of a conversation neither had expected to have. "Thank you for dinner," Robert said finally, "and for the conversation. It was not what I anticipated when I came here tonight." "Nor I," Victoria admitted, though not unpleasantly so. The server returned with the check, which Victoria handled efficiently, adding a substantial tip despite Robert's earlier insistence. As they prepared to leave, Robert extended his hand. "It was interesting meeting you, Ms. Harrington." Victoria regarded his offered hand briefly before accepting it, noting the strength in his grip and the calluses earned through physical work so different from the manicured handshakes of her usual associates. Likewise, Mr. Morgan. They walked together toward the restaurant entrance, an unlikely pair drawing curious glances from staff and patrons alike. Outside, the valet hurried to retrieve Victoria's Bentley, while Robert prepared to walk to the subway station visible several blocks away. "You are taking public transportation?" Victoria asked, the question emerging with genuine curiosity rather than condescension. "It's efficient," Robert replied with a slight smile echoing her earlier values. Victoria found herself hesitating, an unusual sensation for someone accustomed to decisive action. "I could offer you a ride. It's no inconvenience." Robert seemed to consider the offer seriously before shaking his head. "I appreciate that, but I enjoy the walk. Gives me time to think." As her car arrived, Victoria felt an unfamiliar reluctance to end the encounter. Something about Robert Morgan had disrupted her carefully ordered worldview, not dramatically, but like a small stone creating ripples in a still pond. "For what it's worth," Robert said, as she prepared to depart, "the people who hurt you were wrong. Not everyone is like them. Not everyone is." The simple statement offered without expectation or agenda caught Victoria completely off guard. Before she could formulate a response, Robert nodded a goodbye and turned toward the subway, his figure soon disappearing among the evening pedestrians. Victoria settled into her Bentley's leather seat, directing her driver toward her penthouse. The familiar comfort of luxury surrounded her. Yet something felt subtly different, as if the coordinates of her internal map had shifted by a degree too small to measure, but significant enough to change the destination. Back in her penthouse 30 minutes later, Victoria moved through her evening routine with mechanical precision. The space was immaculate, designed by a renowned minimalist architect, featuring clean lines and curated emptiness that usually provided a sense of control after chaotic days. Tonight, however, the pristine silence felt hollow rather than peaceful. Victoria poured herself a glass of scotch, Macallan 25, a bottle worth more than Robert Morgan likely earned in a week, and carried it to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Lights glittered below buildings and streets, forming patterns of commerce and community. Somewhere out there, Robert Morgan was probably reading his daughter a bedtime story, his day's concerns temporarily set aside to create a moment of security for a child who had already lost too much. Victoria sipped her scotch, its familiar warmth failing to provide the usual comfort. Her phone chimed with emails demanding attention, acquisition details, board concerns, market analyses, but for once she didn't immediately respond. Instead, she found herself doing something unprecedented. She opened her browser and searched for Robert Morgan. The results were unsurprisingly modest: a LinkedIn profile listing his employment history and technical certifications, a mention in a local newspaper article about volunteers who had repaired an elderly veteran's roof, a photograph of him accepting a community service award from a neighborhood association. No corporate achievements, no noteworthy financial successes. Nothing that would register as significant by the metrics Victoria had used to measure value throughout her career. Yet something about the man had left an impression deeper than most of the power brokers and industry titans she encountered regularly. Building walls high enough to keep out pain also keeps out everything worth living for. His words echoed in her mind, challenging assumptions she had built her life upon. Victoria had constructed her empire on the foundation of self-protection, believing isolation was the necessary price of success. She had accepted that bargain without question, measuring its value in stock prices and market share, rather than any more intangible metrics. What would Robert Morgan measure instead? The question formed unbidden in her mind. The respect in his daughter's eyes, the integrity of work well done even when unrecognized, the ability to face himself in the mirror. Without justifications or equivocations, Victoria closed her browser, irritated by the direction of her thoughts. One dinner conversation with a maintenance supervisor was hardly grounds for existential questioning. Tomorrow she would return to the acquisition of Stellaris Technologies, to board politics and market strategy, to the familiar terrain of ambition and achievement. Yet as she prepared for bed in her perfectly appointed penthouse, Victoria found herself composing an email in her mind, a brief note of thanks for the unexpected conversation, perhaps with information about the Harrington Foundation's STEM program for Robert's daughter. A small gesture, insignificant in the grand scheme of her empire, But perhaps she thought his sleep finally claimed her not entirely without value. Robert Morgan twisted the wrench with practiced precision, his breath forming small clouds in the basement's frigid air. The boiler groaned in protest, decades of mineral buildup, making the valve resistant to his efforts. Above him, 4 floors of apartments depended on this temperamental machine for heat. Outside, November winds howled through Chicago streets, temperatures plummeting toward record lows. "Come on, you stubborn beast," Robert muttered, applying more pressure until the valve finally surrendered with a reluctant squeal. Water gushed into the drainage pan, rust-colored at first, then gradually clearing. Another temporary fix to a system that needed complete replacement, not endless patches. His phone vibrated. The screen displayed a text from Mrs. Kaplan in 3B. "Still no heat. Abby said you were working on it." Robert wiped his hands on a shop rag before responding. His daughter often checked on the elderly residents during her after-school hours, a habit that filled him with quiet pride. He promised Mrs. Kaplan heat within the hour, adding that he'd bring up an extra space heater just in case. The building's intercom crackled to life. "Morgan, you down there? It's Peterson." The building owner's voice carried impatience even through the distorted speaker. Robert pushed the response button. "Working on the boiler, sir. Should have heat restored soon." "Make it quick. I've got investors touring the property at noon. Can't have tenants complaining about freezing apartments." The connection cut before Robert could respond. He returned to the boiler, frustration tightening his jaw. Peterson Development had purchased the building 6 months ago, promising upgrades that never materialized. Instead, maintenance requests piled up while Peterson focused on cosmetic improvements to the lobby and exterior changes that justified rent increases but ignored critical infrastructure. Robert had submitted 3 detailed proposals for replacing the heating system, each returned with the same stamp: denied budget constraints. Meanwhile, Peterson drove a new Lexus and complained about the cost of parts for essential repairs. As Robert worked, his mind drifted to the job interview that had never happened 3 weeks ago. Dave had called the next day, apologetic and embarrassed. The position had been filled internally before Robert even arrived at Bordeaux Hall, a fact Dave's contact hadn't bothered to share. Another door closed before it had truly opened. The boiler finally cooperated, heat beginning to circulate through ancient pipes. Robert gathered his tools, the familiar weight of the metal box, an extension of himself after 15 years in the trade. As he climbed the narrow stairs toward the main floor, his phone vibrated again, this time an email notification. He nearly dropped the toolbox when he saw the sender, Victoria Harrington. 3 weeks had passed since their unexpected dinner conversation. 3 weeks without contact, exactly as he'd expected. People like Victoria Harrington didn't maintain connections with maintenance supervisors once the novelty wore off. Whatever momentary interest she'd shown had surely dissipated in the cold light of morning, replaced by acquisition strategies and billion-dollar decisions. Yet here was an email, its subject line coolly professional: Harrington Foundation, STEM program information. Robert's thumb hovered over the notification, uncertainty holding him in place on the dimly lit stairwell. Before he could decide whether to open it, the building's front door slammed open, bringing with it a blast of frigid air and his daughter's excited voice. Dad, you'll never believe what happened at school today." Abby burst into the stairwell, her backpack bouncing against her purple winter coat, cheeks flushed from cold and excitement. Robert pocketed his phone, Victoria Harrington's email temporarily forgotten, as he set down his toolbox to receive Abby's enthusiastic hug. "What happened, kiddo?" Abby's words tumbled out in a breathless rush. "Mrs. Wilson entered my bridge design in the citywide engineering contest. She said it was the most innovative structure she's seen from a 4th grader in 20 years of teaching. The finals are at the Museum of Science and Industry next month, and the winner gets a scholarship to summer engineering camp at Northwestern." Pride surged through Robert's chest, momentarily displacing the morning's frustrations. "That's amazing, Abs. I knew that design was special." Abby's smile faltered slightly. "But the entry fee is $7 and we need to buy materials for the final model." Reality crashed back with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. $75 plus materials, at least another $50 when the electric bill was already past due, and Abby's winter boots were held together with duct tape inside where she thought he couldn't see. "We'll figure it out," Robert assured her, ruffling her hair. "Your brain is getting into that competition if I have to sell my tools to make it happen." Abby's smile returned full force, her faith in him untarnished by the economic realities that kept him awake at night. Can we work on the design tonight? I have ideas for making the suspension cables even stronger. Absolutely, right after dinner. Robert picked up his toolbox, leading Abby toward the small apartment they called home. But first I need to check on Mrs. Kaplan's heat. Want to help me deliver this space heater upstairs? Mrs. Kaplan welcomed them with warmth that belied her 92 years, pressing a chocolate chip cookie into Abby's hand and insisting Robert take one too. My grandson sent me too many again, she claimed, though Robert suspected she baked them specifically for Abby's after-school visits. As they set up the space heater, Ms. Kaplan's arthritis-curved fingers touched Robert's arm. The landlord was here earlier with men in expensive suits. They were measuring things, talking about market potential and modernization opportunities. A cold feeling that had nothing to do with the struggling heat settled in Robert's stomach. Did they say anything specific? Not to me directly, but I heard one man mention something about luxury conversion and relocating existing tenants. Miss Kaplan's eyes, clouded with cataracts but sharp with concern, held his. I've lived here 47 years, Robert. This is my home. Don't worry, Mrs. K, they can't just throw people out. The reassurance felt hollow even as he spoke it. Robert had seen this pattern before: corporate buyers acquiring affordable housing, forcing out long-term residents through massive rent increases or building code compliance issues that somehow never affected the new higher-paying tenants. Back in their apartment, Robert sent Abby to start her homework while he prepared dinner spaghetti with the sauce stretched further than the recipe intended. As water boiled on the stove, he finally opened Victoria's email. Mr. Morgan, our conversation prompted me to review the Harrington Foundation's STEM initiative protocols. You raised valid concerns about our selection process inadvertently filtering out qualified candidates from under-resourced schools. I've attached information about our program for elementary-age girls with aptitude in engineering and applied sciences. The application deadline has been extended to December 15th. The process has been simplified, though standards remain rigorous. If your daughter is interested, I encourage you to submit an application. Regards, Victoria Harrington, CEO, Harrington Technologies. Formal, distant, yet the underlying message was clear. She had actually considered his critique and made changes. The attachment contained detailed information about a program that would provide Abby with mentorship, advanced instruction, and connections that could open doors Robert couldn't even approach. He stared at the screen, conflicting emotions churning beneath his careful composure. On one hand, this was exactly the opportunity Abby deserved, the chance to develop her remarkable mind beyond what their limited resources could provide. On the other, accepting help from Victoria Harrington felt dangerously close to charity, the very thing his pride rebelled against. The application itself was straightforward, but required teacher recommendations, examples of original projects, and a personal essay. Completely merit-based, with no mention of financial requirements. As Robert scrolled through, his resistance softened. This wasn't a handout, it was recognition of Abby's potential. The pasta water boiled over, hissing against the burner and breaking his contemplation. Robert closed the email, deciding to think about it overnight. Some opportunities were too important for pride to stand in their way, but some principles were too central to compromise. Dinner was animated by Abby's excitement about her bridge design, her hands gesturing energetically as she explained the structural modifications she'd envisioned. Robert listened attentively, marveling at how she intuitively grasped concepts he'd learned through years of practical experience. The key is distributing the tension through multiple points, Abby explained, drawing diagrams on her napkin. Like when you fixed Mrs. Kaplan's shelf by adding support brackets at precise intervals instead of just in the center. Robert's chest tightened with a bittersweet ache. She had her mother's quick mind and analytical approach, qualities Jennifer had used to become the first person in her family to earn a college degree. Before cancer had stolen her from them, Jennifer had dreamed of their daughter attending her alma mater. Now that responsibility fell solely to Robert, along with everything else. After dinner and homework, they spread Abby's bridge designs across the living room floor. Robert offered suggestions from his practical knowledge, while Abby integrated principles she'd absorbed from the engineering books he'd found at library sales. Together, they refined her concept until Abby's eyelids began to droop, despite her protests that she wasn't tired. Once she was asleep, Robert returned to Victoria's email, reading it again more carefully. The foundation program would provide exactly the kind of enrichment Abby needed, the kind he struggled to give her despite his best efforts. His finger hovered over the reply button, pride wrestling with pragmatism in a familiar battle. Before he could decide, another email notification appeared. This one from Peterson Development, addressed to all building tenants. Important notice. Property renovation announcement. Robert's stomach dropped as he opened the message. The corporate speak couldn't disguise the essential truth: the building was being converted to luxury micro-apartments, with rents starting at triple the current rates. Current tenants would have 60 days to either accept the new terms or vacate. 60 days, through Christmas and New Year's, in Chicago winter. Robert set down his phone, the weight of responsibility pressing against his chest like a physical force. Mrs. Kaplan had nowhere to go. The Rodriguez family in 2A had 3 children and lived paycheck to paycheck. The Novaks in 4C were expecting their first baby in February, and Abby, his brilliant, resilient daughter, who had already lost so much, would once again have her security threatened, her stability undermined by forces beyond his control. Robert's thoughts returned to Victoria Harrington's email with newfound urgency. The foundation program wouldn't solve their housing crisis, but it represented one stable element he might secure for Abby amid the coming upheaval. With economic pressure mounting and his stubborn pride increasingly looking like an unaffordable luxury, Robert began composing his reply. Ms. Harrington, thank you for the information about the Harrington Foundation's STEM program. I appreciate your reconsideration of the application process. Abby would be very interested in this opportunity. She was selected today for a citywide engineering competition, which aligns well with your program's focus. I've attached some photos of her recent projects, including the bridge design mentioned above and a rainwater collection system she developed for our building's community garden. Regards, Robert Morgan. He hesitated before pressing send, uncomfortable with the subtle shift this represented from proud self-sufficiency to accepting that sometimes opportunities for Abby's future outweighed his personal reservations. With a deep breath, Robert hit send and closed his laptop, uncertain whether he'd receive a response, but certain he'd done what was necessary for his daughter. The next morning brought fresh challenges. The boiler had failed again overnight, leaving residents shivering in the pre-dawn darkness. Robert worked through his morning routine on autopilot, waking Abby, preparing breakfast, checking her homework, all while mentally cataloging the parts he'd need for yet another temporary repair. Dad, my bridge needs balsa wood for the final model, Abby reminded him as she packed her lunch. Can we get some this weekend? The competition entry fee still loomed, along with the material costs now complicated by the impending housing crisis. Robert forced a smile. Absolutely. Maybe we can check out that new art supply store that opened downtown. Abby's face lit up with excitement that made his financial anxiety momentarily recede. The one with the 3D printers in the window, can we really go there? We'll make a day of it. Now grab your coat before you miss the bus. After seeing Abby off, Robert descended to the basement to wrestle once more with the dying boiler. His phone vibrated in his pocket as he worked. Another email from Victoria Harrington sent at 5:47 a.m. Did the woman ever sleep, Mr. Morgan? Your daughter's projects show remarkable ingenuity. The rainwater collection system particularly impressed our engineering director. The foundation would like to extend a special invitation for Abby to visit Harrington Technologies research facility this Saturday. Our team is developing environmental sustainability technologies that might interest her, and it would provide an opportunity for preliminary assessment before formal applications close. Please advise if this would be convenient. Victoria Harrington. Robert stared at the screen, conflicting emotions rising once again. The invitation was clearly an accelerated path into the program, offering Abby access to resources and mentorship he could never provide. But Saturday was their planned trip to the art supply store, one of the small joys he could still offer despite their financial constraints. More importantly, the invitation represented a fundamental power imbalance. Victoria Harrington could casually offer opportunities that would significantly impact Abby's future, while Robert struggled to maintain basic stability. The dynamic uncomfortably echoed their dinner conversation about privilege and access. Yet refusing would hurt only Abby, denying her an opportunity she deserved because of his complicated feelings about accepting help. Robert sighed deeply, setting aside his tools to compose a response that protected his dignity while prioritizing his daughter's needs. Ms. Harrington, thank you for the invitation. Abby would be delighted to visit the research facility this Saturday. She's particularly interested in environmental engineering applications. However, I must accompany her, as I'm sure you understand. Also, we had previously planned to purchase materials for her competition project that day. Would it be possible to schedule the visit for early afternoon, allowing us to maintain our morning plans? Regards, Robert Morgan. The response came within minutes, as if Victoria had been waiting. 11:30 a.m. would work for our team. A car will collect you both at 11:15. Please provide your address. And of course you would accompany her. She's 9. Victoria. The slight edge in her final sentence suggested he had offended her by implying she might have thought otherwise. Robert felt a flicker of satisfaction at having momentarily disrupted her composure, followed immediately by guilt for the petty reaction. This wasn't about his complicated feelings toward Victoria Harrington. It was about Abby's future. He sent their address, then returned to the stubborn boiler, channeling his conflicted emotions into the physical effort of repair. By mid-morning, heat was flowing again, another temporary victory in what increasingly felt like a losing war against entropy and economics. His phone rang as he was washing grease from his hands. Dave's name flashed on the screen. Robert hesitated before answering, still nursing the disappointment of the non-existent job opportunity. "Hey, Rob, got a minute?" Dave's tone carried unusual tension. "What's up?" "You know I handle the commercial property insurance for Peterson Development, right?" Dave paused, lowering his voice. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I just processed paperwork for them to change the building classification. They're applying for permits to convert to luxury micro units with construction starting in January. They already sent notices. We have 60 days to clear out or pay triple rent." Robert's voice remained steady despite the turmoil beneath. "Damn, they move fast. Listen, there's more. The plans I saw, they're cutting corners on the electrical upgrades, using the same subcontractor that did that high-rise in River North where they had the fire last year." Robert's maintenance instincts immediately sharpened. "The one where they installed counterfeit circuit breakers. People died in that fire, Dave." "Exactly. Same contractor, same suppliers. Peterson's trying to maximize profit margins by using gray market parts. I tried raising concerns, but they shut me down." Dave's voice dropped further. "They're paying off inspectors, Rob. City's looking the other way." A cold rage settled in Robert's chest, different from his usual frustrations with Peterson's negligence. This wasn't just cutting corners. It was knowingly endangering lives. "I need to report this." "Be careful, man. These guys have connections. My boss made it clear this is a major client we don't cross." After hanging up, Robert stared at the boiler room wall, thoughts racing. He needed documentation evidence of the dangerous materials before he could report anything. More importantly, he needed a plan for relocating his residents, especially vulnerable ones like Mrs. Kaplan, before the winter deadline. Both problems required resources he didn't have: legal knowledge, connections, influence. The irony wasn't lost on him that the very power dynamics he'd discussed with Victoria Harrington were now directly impacting his life and the safety of people who depended on him. The rest of the week passed in a blur of maintenance emergencies, tenant concerns about the eviction notice, and preparing Abby for both her competition and the visit to Harrington Technologies. Robert found himself increasingly exhausted, the weight of responsibility growing heavier with each passing day. By Saturday morning, dark circles shadowed his eyes, but he maintained a cheerful facade as he and Abby explored the art supply store. Her excitement at selecting materials for her bridge model temporarily lifted his spirits, her creative energy contagious despite his underlying worry. At precisely 11:15, a sleek black car pulled up outside their apartment building. Not a taxi or rideshare, but a luxury sedan with tinted windows and a uniformed driver who opened the door with formal courtesy. Abby's eyes widened. "Is this for us, like in the movies?" "Apparently so," Robert replied, helping her inside while noting the vehicle likely cost more than he'd earned in 3 years. The interior smelled of leather and subtle cologne technology seamlessly integrated into every surface. As they settled into the plush seats, Robert noticed a small gift bag with Abby's name on it. "May I?" she asked, fingers already reaching. "Go ahead." He nodded, watching her carefully. Inside was a small engineering kit, not a toy, but a professional-grade set of precision tools scaled for smaller hands. A card attached read simply, for future innovations, VH. Abby examined each tool with reverent fascination. Dad, these are real instruments like the ones professionals use. They certainly are. Robert felt the familiar tug between gratitude for his daughter's opportunity and discomfort at accepting such an expensive gift. The tools represented exactly what Abby needed, but could never have afforded quality instruments that respected her serious interest rather than treating it as a child's passing fancy. The car glided through Chicago traffic toward the gleaming Harrington Technologies headquarters in the downtown business district. As they approached, Robert realized he'd passed this building countless times without truly seeing it. 40 stories of glass and steel that reflected the sky, a physical manifestation of Victoria Harrington's success and power. The driver escorted them through a private entrance, bypassing the main lobby's security checkpoints. An elevator whisked them to the 38th floor opening, directly into a laboratory space that looked more like a science fiction set than a corporate facility. Scientists in white coats moved between workstations featuring technology Robert had only seen in magazines. Holographic displays showed rotating molecular structures, 3D printers constructed intricate components, and what appeared to be an artificial ecosystem occupied an entire glass-walled chamber. Abby clutched Robert's hand, overwhelmed but eyes shining with excitement. Dad, look at everything. Before Robert could respond, Victoria Harrington appeared from a connecting doorway. The weekend had not diminished her commanding presence, though she'd exchanged her business suit for dark slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Robert's monthly rent. Her hair fell in loose waves rather than the severe style he remembered, softening her features in a way that momentarily caught him off guard. Mr. Morgan, Abby, welcome to Harrington Technologies. Victoria approached with measured steps, her gaze assessing them both with equal intensity. I trust the drive was comfortable. Robert nodded, suddenly aware of his worn jeans and the small paint stain on his shirt sleeve from the art store. Thank you for arranging it. Victoria's attention shifted to Abby. And you must be the engineer I've heard about. Your rainwater collection system was quite impressive. Abby straightened, her natural shyness momentarily overcome by pride. Thank you, Ms. Harrington. Dad helped with the flow calculations. A productive collaboration, then. Victoria gestured toward the laboratory. Would you like to see what we're working on here? Some of our environmental engineers are developing water purification systems that might interest you. Abby nodded eagerly, her earlier trepidation replaced by scientific curiosity. Victoria led them through the laboratory, introducing researchers who treated Abby not as a child, but as a young colleague, explaining concepts in simplified terms without condescension. Robert observed silently, torn between pride in Abby's quick understanding and awareness of how easily Victoria navigated this world that was so foreign to him. She spoke the language of innovation and discovery, fluently translating complex ideas into accessible explanations that connected to Abby's existing knowledge. One scientist demonstrated a miniature water filtration system designed for emergency deployment in disaster zones. The challenge is creating something portable enough for airdrops but robust enough to function in extreme conditions, she explained, showing Abby the internal components. What if you layered the filtration stages in concentric circles instead of stacking them? Abby suggested, pointing to the current linear arrangement. It would take up less vertical space but still maintain the surface area. The scientist blinked in surprise, exchanging a glance with Victoria. That's actually a very interesting approach. We hadn't considered that configuration. Victoria's expression revealed nothing, but Robert caught a flicker of something in her eyes, satisfaction perhaps, or vindication of her interest in Abby's potential. The tour continued to a large conference room where lunch had been arranged, not the cafeteria fare Robert had expected, but an elegant spread that reminded him of their dinner at Bordeaux Hall. As they settled at the table, Robert noticed Victoria studying him with the same analytical intensity she'd shown 3 weeks ago. Your daughter has impressive spatial reasoning, she observed as Abby examined a 3D printed model of a sustainable housing project. Her ability to visualize alternative configurations is unusually developed for her age. She gets that from her mother, Robert replied. The familiar pride tinged with lingering grief. Jennifer could look at a problem from angles most people never considered. Victoria's gaze remained steady. And from you, I suspect. Your maintenance work requires similar skills, understanding how systems interconnect, identifying failure points, developing solutions with limited resources. The observation surprised Robert. Few people recognize the intellectual components of his profession, instead viewing it as purely manual labor, requiring strength rather than strategy. Different applications of the same principles. He acknowledged, unexpectedly pleased by her insight. Their conversation was interrupted as Abby returned to the table, eyes bright with excitement. Dad, they have a wind tunnel for testing aerodynamic designs. Dr. Patel said I could try different bridge structures in it to see which ones have the least resistance. That sounds amazing, Abs. Robert smiled at her enthusiasm before glancing at Victoria. Though I wouldn't want to impose on Dr. Patel's time. It's no imposition, Victoria replied smoothly. Our Saturday research team, Maushanet, often tests personal projects. It keeps creative thinking fresh. As lunch progressed, Robert noticed Victoria observing the interaction between him and Abby with unusual attention, her analytical mind seemingly cataloging their relationship dynamics. When Abby excused herself to use the restroom, Victoria's professional veneer slipped slightly. She's quite remarkable, she said, the admission carrying genuine admiration rather than perfunctory praise. Not just intellectually, but her approach to challenges. Most children her age become frustrated when their initial ideas don't work immediately. Robert felt the familiar surge of pride. Abby understands that failure is part of the process. We have a rule at home: you're not allowed to quit until you've tried at least 3 different approaches. A valuable philosophy. Victoria's tone carried unexpected sincerity. One many of my executives could benefit from adopting. The comment created a momentary bridge between their disparate worlds, a shared value transcending the socio-economic gulf between them. Before Robert could respond, Victoria's phone chimed with a notification that immediately transformed her expression. "Excuse me?" she murmured, scanning the screen with increasing tension in her posture. Whatever the message contained clearly disrupted her carefully maintained composure. Robert recognized the shift, having seen similar reactions in people receiving bad news. "Is everything all right?" Victoria hesitated, something unusual for a woman who seemed to calculate every response. A situation with the Stellaris acquisition. My COO has apparently been conducting parallel negotiations without board approval. The professional mask slipped further, revealing a flash of personal betrayal beneath. Marcus was my fiancé once, before he decided my obsession with success made me difficult to live with. Now he's attempting to undermine the most significant acquisition of my career. The unexpected personal disclosure hung between them, Victoria immediately appearing to regret the momentary vulnerability. She straightened composure, reinstated with visible effort. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." "It wasn't," Robert countered quietly. "It was human." Victoria regarded him with an unreadable expression. Their exchange interrupted as Abby returned, oblivious to the tension she'd walked into. "Dr. Patel says the wind tunnel is ready if we want to try it." Victoria smoothly redirected her attention. "Excellent. Perhaps your father would like to observe the testing as well." The remainder of the visit proceeded with Victoria maintaining professional distance. Though Robert occasionally caught her watching him interact with Abby, her expression thoughtful rather than analytical. When they eventually prepared to leave, she escorted them personally to the elevator rather than delegating to an assistant. "Abby, our foundation director, would like to speak with you briefly before you go," Victoria said, indicating a friendly-looking woman waiting near the elevator. "She has some questions about your competition project." As Abby moved toward the foundation director, Victoria turned to Robert, her voice lowered for privacy. "I received information about Peterson Development's plans for your building. The materials they're sourcing for the electrical upgrades are potentially dangerous." Robert stared at her, startled by both her knowledge and direct approach. "How did you—" "I make it my business to know about significant real estate developments in the city," Victoria cut him off smoothly, "particularly when they involve questionable safety practices." The implication was clear. She had investigated his situation after their dinner conversation, exercising her considerable resources to gather information he had no access to. "The city inspectors are being paid to look the other way." Robert confirmed professional concern, temporarily overriding his discomfort with her intervention. "Without documentation of the counterfeit materials, I can't file an effective report." Victoria considered this with the same focused attention she might give a complex business problem. Documentation could be arranged provided one knew when the materials were being delivered and had appropriate expertise to identify the counterfeit components. I have the expertise, Robert replied. What I lack is access to delivery schedules and a way to document findings that officials can't ignore. Those could be provided. Victoria's tone remained neutral, though the offer was anything but. I sit on several municipal boards with oversight capabilities. If evidence were properly documented, certain channels could be accessed. Robert understood what she was proposing, using her influence and resources to address a situation he couldn't handle alone. The help he desperately needed offered in terms that respected his expertise while acknowledging the power differential between them. I'd need to be directly involved. He stipulated, unwilling to be a passive recipient of her intervention. This affects my residents personally. Mrs. Kaplan has lived in her apartment for 47 years. The Rodriguez family has 3 children under 10. They deserve safe housing, not profits built on dangerous shortcuts. Victoria nodded, once respect flickering in her expression. I'll have my team contact you with the necessary information. The documentation will require your expertise to be credible. The conversation shifted as Abby returned, excited about her discussion with the foundation director. As they prepared to enter the elevator, Victoria addressed Abby directly. Your bridge designed for the competition, what materials are you using for the final model? Balsa wood carbon fiber thread for the tension elements and a special resin Dad found that creates stronger joints, Abby explained enthusiastically. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Our materials science division recently developed a composite that might be interesting for your tension elements. It has 5 times the strength-to-weight ratio of standard options. She glanced at Robert. With your permission, I could have samples sent for her project. Robert recognized the careful phrasing. Victoria was deliberately asking his permission, rather than simply offering the materials directly to Abby, respecting his parental authority, despite her ability to provide resources he couldn't. That would be very helpful, he acknowledged, setting aside pride in favor of Abby's opportunity. Thank you. As the elevator doors closed, Abby's excitement bubbled over. Dad, did you see the wind tunnel and the 3D printers? And Dr. Patel said my idea about the filtration system was genuinely innovative. Robert smiled at her joy, momentarily eclipsing his complicated feelings about Victoria's intervention. I saw. You impressed some very smart people today, Abs. Ms. Harrington isn't as scary as she looks on TV, Abby observed with characteristic directness. She listened to my ideas like they mattered. Because they do matter, Robert replied, realizing that Victoria's respectful treatment of Abby, not as a child to be humored, but as a mind to be engaged, had significantly altered his perception of her. The car returned them home, where they found a package waiting at their apartment door. Inside was a set of professional-grade modeling materials, including the specialized composite Victoria had mentioned, with a note on Harrington Technologies letterhead, for your competition project. Our materials science team is interested in your results. Later that evening, after Abby had fallen asleep surrounded by bridge design sketches, Robert received an email containing delivery schedules for Peterson Development's building materials, security access codes for the construction site, and contact information for a city council member with oversight of building safety regulations. The message contained no personal note, no signature, just the information he needed to document the safety violations and protect his residents. Victoria Harrington's approach was as efficient as it was effective, providing tools rather than taking over. Robert sat at his kitchen table, staring at the information that represented both salvation and an uncomfortable dependence on someone whose world operated by different rules than his own. The power imbalance remained, yet Victoria had framed her help in terms of partnership rather than charity, acknowledging his expertise while supplementing it with resources only she could provide. His phone chimed with another message, this one from Dave. Peterson Development just fired me as their insurance broker. Word is they found out I was asking questions about their material suppliers. Watch your back, Rob. These guys played dirty. The warning only reinforced the stakes of what Robert was undertaking. Without Victoria's intervention, his efforts to protect the building's residents would likely have been futile against Peterson's political connections and financial resources. With her support, he had a fighting chance, not just for documentation, but for actual consequences. Robert began organizing the information, methodically planning his approach to documenting the counterfeit materials. As he worked, his thoughts returned to Victoria, not the billionaire CEO whose name appeared on buildings, but the woman who had recognized Abby's potential and respected Robert's expertise despite the vast gulf between their circumstances. Their worlds remained fundamentally different, separated by wealth, power, and experience. Yet through Abby, through this building safety crisis, through their unexpected connection, those separate worlds had begun to intersect in ways neither could have anticipated. 4 days later, Robert received an urgent call from the building's front desk. Mrs. Kaplan had fallen in her apartment and couldn't get up. The ambulance was on its way, but she was asking for him. Robert raced upstairs, finding Mrs. Kaplan on her bathroom floor, face pale with pain. "I think it's my hip," she whispered, embarrassment evident despite her discomfort. "I'm sorry to bother you." "You're never a bother, Mrs. K." Robert knelt beside her, checking for other injuries while making her as comfortable as possible until medical help arrived. "Just stay still. Help is coming." As they waited, Mrs. Kaplan clutched his hand with surprising strength. "Robert promised me something. Don't let them take my home. I raised my children here. My Harold died here. And all my memories are in these walls." The plea tightened around Robert's heart like a vice. "I'm doing everything I can," he promised, the words feeling hollow against Peterson Development's resources and connections. The paramedics arrived minutes later, professionally efficient as they stabilized and transported Mrs. Kaplan. Robert followed the ambulance in his car, calling Abby's after-school program to explain he'd be late and arranging for her to stay with a neighbor until he returned. At the hospital, hours passed in sterile waiting rooms as Mrs. Kaplan underwent surgery for a broken hip. Robert remained, knowing she had no family nearby to advocate for her. When the surgeon finally emerged, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "The surgery went well, but recovery at her age will be challenging. She'll need rehabilitation, possibly an extended stay in a skilled nursing facility before she can return home." The doctor hesitated. "Does she have family who can help with arrangements?" "Her children live out of state. I'm her building superintendent." Robert rubbed his tired eyes. "I'll contact her son in Arizona." "She's fortunate to have such a dedicated superintendent," the doctor remarked before continuing to his next patient. Robert sat heavily in the waiting room chair, the full impact of the situation settling over him. Mrs. Kaplan would lose her apartment during a rehabilitation, exactly what Peterson Development wanted. By the time she recovered, the building would be converted, her home of 47 years transformed into a luxury micro-unit beyond her fixed income budget. Without conscious decision, Robert found himself calling Victoria's number, not her office, but the direct line she'd provided for the building safety documentation. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and focused. "Harrington, it's Robert Morgan. I'm sorry to call like this, but..." He hesitated, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this contact was. Their arrangement concerned building safety documentation, not personal crises. "What's happened?" Victoria's tone shifted subtly, recognizing the tension in his voice. Robert explained Mrs. Kaplan's situation, the words tumbling out with uncharacteristic disorganization. He wasn't sure what he expected, perhaps legal advice or a recommendation for elder advocacy services. What he didn't expect was Victoria's immediate practical response. "Which hospital? I'll make some calls." "Northwestern Memorial." "But I wasn't asking you to..." "I serve on Northwestern's board," Victoria interrupted, "and I have connections with several rehabilitation facilities that provide sliding scale services. Stay where you are. I'll handle this." Before Robert could protest, she had ended the call, leaving him staring at his phone in the sterile hospital corridor. 30 minutes later, a hospital administrator approached her, manner deferential. "Mr. Morgan, I understand you're Mrs. Kaplan's designated representative. We've arranged for her to receive VIP care and have secured a place at Lakeside Rehabilitation Center when she's ready for transfer. All expenses are covered by the hospital's community care fund." Robert recognized the fiction for what it was, Victoria's influence, creating opportunities where bureaucracy would have created obstacles. His complicated feelings about accepting help wrestled with profound relief that Miss Kaplan would receive the care she needed. "Thank you," he managed, the words inadequate for the weight of his gratitude. As he prepared to leave, his phone chimed with a text from Victoria. "Mrs. Kaplan's housing situation will be addressed. Focus on your daughter tonight. We'll discuss next steps tomorrow." The message's tone was businesslike, yet the underlying consideration remembering Abby needed him tonight revealed an awareness of his priorities that surprised him. Victoria Harrington, who commanded boardrooms and managed billion-dollar acquisitions, had taken time from her evening to solve a problem that affected a 92-year-old woman she'd never met simply because Robert had asked. Driving home through Chicago's evening traffic, Robert struggled to reconcile his perceptions of Victoria. The cold billionaire from Bordeaux Hall seemed increasingly at odds with the woman who respected Abby's intellect and extended her considerable influence to help a stranger in need. Perhaps most confusing was his own response to her intervention: gratitude, mixed with discomfort, relief tangled with concern about dependence. The power dynamic between them remained fundamentally unbalanced, yet Victoria had consistently framed her help in terms that preserved his dignity rather than diminishing it. As Robert picked up Abby from the neighbor's apartment, his daughter immediately sensed his preoccupation. "Is everything okay, Dad? You look worried." Mrs. Kaplan had a fall and needed to go to the hospital. He explained, simplifying the complex emotions beneath his concern. "She'll be okay, but she needs to stay in a special facility while she gets better." Abby's face creased with worry. "But what about her apartment? All her things, her photo albums, and her husband's medals, and the ceramic cat collection?" "We'll figure it out," Robert assured her, though the logistics seemed insurmountable given Peterson's 60-day timeline and Mrs. Kaplan's likely months-long recovery. "Maybe Miss Harrington could help," Abby suggested with childlike directness. "She has lots of buildings. I went maybe Mrs. Kaplan could live in one of hers." The innocent suggestion hit uncomfortably close to the dynamic Robert had been wrestling with, the ease with which Victoria could solve problems that seemed insurmountable to him and the complex emotions that created. "It's complicated, Abs," he replied gently, "but we'll find a solution." That night, after Abby was asleep, Robert sat at their small kitchen table, reviewing the building material documentation he had gathered. Tomorrow he would meet with the city council member Victoria had connected him with, presenting evidence of Peterson Development's dangerous practices. The outcome remained uncertain, but for the first time, he had hoped that the system might actually work as intended. His phone chimed with an email notification from Victoria. "Meeting arranged with Councilwoman Chen tomorrow at 10 a.m. Car will collect you at 9:30. Bring in all documentation. Legal representation will be provided." The message was followed by a second, less formal note. "Mrs. Kaplan's housing situation is being addressed through channels that won't connect back to either of us. Some battles are better won quietly." Robert stared at the screen, understanding the subtext. Victoria was using her influence to protect Mrs. Kaplan, doing so in ways that shielded both Robert and herself from potential retaliation from Peterson Development. The consideration was as unexpected as it was thorough. He began typing a response, then paused, uncertain how to navigate this evolving relationship. They weren't friends in any conventional sense, yet their connection had deepened beyond the initial clash of philosophies at Bordeaux Hall. Victoria had seen something in Abby worth nurturing, something in Robert's situation worth addressing, something in their interaction worth continuing, despite the obvious disparities between their worlds. Finally, Robert sent a simple reply: "Thank you, not just for the help, but for how you've provided it." The response came minutes later, suggesting Victoria was working late as usual. "Dignity matters, you taught me that." 4 words that acknowledged something fundamental had shifted between them, not erasing the power imbalance or their philosophical differences, but creating a bridge of mutual respect across the divide. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the meeting with Councilwoman Chen, continuing documentation of Peterson's violations, navigating Mrs. Kaplan's recovery, preparing Abby for her engineering competition. But tonight, Robert allowed himself a moment of cautious hope that perhaps some battles didn't have to be fought alone, and that accepting help didn't always mean surrendering dignity. His final thought before sleep claimed him was of Victoria Harrington, not the billionaire CEO, but the woman who had listened to his criticism about her foundation's selection process and actually changed it, who had treated his daughter with genuine respect rather than condescension, who had extended her considerable influence to help people she'd never met simply because Robert had asked. Their worlds remained fundamentally different, separated by wealth, power, and life experience. Yet somehow improbably, those separate worlds had begun to intersect in ways neither could have anticipated when they first clashed in Bordeaux Hall just 1 month ago. The black town car pulled up to City Hall precisely at 9:55 a.m. on Monday, December 16th. Robert Morgan gathered his documentation, the weight of the manila folder, a physical manifestation of weeks of meticulous record-keeping. This morning would determine whether Peterson Development's dangerous cost-cutting would be addressed or if corporate connections would once again shield the powerful from accountability. Catherine Winters, from Hamilton and Reed, waited in the lobby, her tailored suit and confident stance marking her as one of Chicago's elite attorneys. She extended her hand with a firm grip that surprised Robert, her assessment of him brief but thorough. "Ms. Harrington has briefed me extensively," Catherine said, leading him toward security. "Your documentation is remarkably comprehensive for someone without legal training. The councilwoman has allocated 30 minutes we need to make every second count." As they rode the elevator to the fifth floor, Robert sensed tension beneath Catherine's professional veneer. "Should I be aware of anything before we meet Councilwoman Chen?" Catherine's gaze remained fixed on the elevator doors. The Building Safety Commission she chairs is heavily influenced by development interests. Peterson has contributed significantly to several members' campaigns. She turned to face him directly. "Frame everything in terms of public safety and potential liability, not tenant concerns. Politicians respond to risk, not righteousness." Councilwoman Chen's office projected calculated accessibility family photos, strategically positioned awards displayed with deliberate modesty. The councilwoman herself rose from behind her desk, her practiced smile never reaching her eyes. "Mr. Morgan, Ms. Winters, I understand you have concerns about a development project in my district." For the next 25 minutes, Robert presented his evidence with methodical precision. Delivery manifests for electrical components failing to meet code requirements, photographs of counterfeit circuit breakers installed in previous Peterson properties, documentation of safety violations that had resulted in injuries at other sites. He concluded with floor plans showing how the proposed renovation would create multiple fire hazards in violation of city ordinances. Councilwoman Chen listened with increasing discomfort, her political instincts visibly calculating risk factors. When Robert finished, she tapped her pen against her desk calendar, avoiding direct eye contact. "These allegations certainly warrant investigation, Mr. Morgan. However, we must be careful not to impede development based on technical disagreements." Catherine leaned forward slightly. "Councilwoman, with respect, these aren't technical disagreements. They're documented safety violations identical to those that resulted in 3 deaths during the River North fire last January." Her tone remained pleasant, but the implication hung clearly in the air. "The Tribune's investigative team has shown particular interest in the relationship between building code enforcement and campaign finance." The councilwoman's expression shifted imperceptibly. "I take public safety very seriously, Ms. Winters. My office will arrange emergency inspections within 48 hours. She slid her business card across the desk. "Please contact my chief of staff directly with any additional information." Outside City Hall, Catherine's professional reserve softened slightly. "That went better than expected." Chen recognized she's more vulnerable to association with a preventable tragedy than to losing a developer's support. "I didn't mention the Tribune," Robert noted, puzzled by the reference. Catherine's smile was knowing. "No, but Ms. Harrington did when she called Chen's chief of staff yesterday. Victoria has a remarkable talent for creating leverage where none should exist." The revelation shouldn't have surprised Robert, yet it did not the action itself, but the fact that Victoria hadn't mentioned it, hadn't sought credit for creating the opening they needed. "Will it be enough?" he asked as they approached the waiting car. "Depends on what the inspectors find and document. Chen will protect herself first, Peterson second, and the public third in that order. But with proper documentation, even political connections won't suffice to ignore 17 critical safety violations." As Catherine handed Robert her card, she added something unexpected. "Miss Harrington rarely involves herself personally in these matters, Mr. Morgan. I've represented her for 8 years, and I've never seen her commit resources like this outside of corporate interests." Her gaze was direct, professional, but curious. "Whatever impression you've made, it's unprecedented." Before Robert could respond, she was walking away, leaving him with the unsettling awareness that his connection to Victoria had become a subject of speculation among her inner circle. He settled into the car, his phone vibrating with a text from Victoria. "Meeting outcome." Robert hesitated only briefly. "Inspections scheduled within 48 hours. Your attorney was extremely effective. The response came quickly. She's the best. Keep me informed of developments. The exchange was professional, focused entirely on the immediate issue rather than the increasingly complex dynamic evolving between them. Yet Robert found himself studying Victoria's messages for subtext or for hints of the person behind the power, a habit he'd never developed with anyone else. The car had barely pulled away from City Hall when his phone rang Peterson Development's number. Robert silenced it, preferring to have that confrontation on his own terms. The reprieve lasted only until he reached his building where Peterson himself waited in the lobby, fury barely contained behind an expensive suit. "Morgan, my office, now." Peterson's tone left no room for negotiation. Inside the cramped management office, Peterson closed the door with controlled violence. "You went to the city council behind my back." The words emerged with careful restraint, but rage simmered beneath each syllable. "I reported legitimate safety concerns through appropriate channels," Robert replied calmly. "The same concerns I've documented in maintenance reports for months. Those reports were addressed. You were instructed to focus on your assigned duties." "My assigned duties include ensuring this building meets safety codes. The materials you've ordered don't meet those codes. They put lives at risk." Peterson's composure cracked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're fired effective immediately. Clear out your apartment by Friday. And if you think your little crusade will change anything, remember I have connections throughout this industry. One call from me, and you'll be unhireable in Chicago." Robert had anticipated this moment, had prepared mentally since accepting Victoria's help, yet the reality still struck with physical force. Not just unemployment, but homelessness during Chicago's harshest season, with Abby depending on him. "You can fire me," Robert acknowledged, "but the inspection is still happening. The documentation is already submitted. Firing me doesn't erase safety violations." Peterson's smile held no warmth. "Perhaps not, but it makes your life significantly more difficult." He leaned closer. "References matter in this industry, Morgan. How long can a single father survive unemployed? How much stability can you provide your daughter while jobless and homeless?" The threat wasn't subtle, and its implications for Abby's future sent cold fear through Robert's chest. Yet beneath that fear burned something stronger, the certainty that protecting vulnerable residents from dangerous conditions was worth whatever personal cost he might bear. "Threats don't change facts, Mr. Peterson. The inspection will proceed regardless. Get out of my office. Your final check will be mailed minus damages for breach of confidentiality clauses in your contract." Robert left without further argument, understanding that Peterson's retaliation was just beginning. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, the weight of consequences pressed against his shoulders. He had anticipated being fired, but the threat of being blacklisted throughout the industry carried implications for Abby that twisted his stomach into knots. His instinct was to call Victoria to update her on these developments, yet something held him back. Their arrangement had focused on documenting safety violations, not managing the personal fallout of his whistleblowing. Asking for her intervention yet again felt like crossing a boundary he wasn't certain should be crossed. Instead, Robert called Dave, explaining the situation in measured tones that belied his internal turmoil. "Jesus, Rob, Peterson's not messing around. He's got connections with half the property management companies in the city." "I know, but the safety violations are real. People could pay him if those materials are installed." Dave's sigh carried through the line. "Always the hero. Look, I'll ask around about positions, but finding something before Christmas will be tough. You've got savings to tide you over." Robert's silence answered more eloquently than words could have. "That's what I thought. What about a place to stay?" "We'll figure something out." Robert ended the call before Dave could press further, unwilling to reveal the full extent of his vulnerability. Throughout that evening and the next day, Robert divided his time between updating his resume, contacting industry connections, and preparing Abby for the possibility of moving. He framed it as an adventure rather than a crisis, but her perceptive eyes caught the tension he couldn't fully disguise. "Is this because you reported the dangerous wires?" she asked that night as they sat at their small kitchen table. Partly, Robert admitted, never sugarcoating reality for his daughter. Mr. Peterson wasn't happy about that. "But you did the right thing," Abby stated with absolute certainty. "You always say safety comes first, even when it's inconvenient." Her simple faith in his principles both comforted and intensified Robert's determination. Whatever came next, he would face it without compromising the values he was teaching her. By Wednesday morning, December 18th, Robert had submitted applications to 17 positions with only one lukewarm response. Peterson's influence was already evident in the polite but firm rejections from companies that had previously expressed interest in his expertise. The city inspectors arrived at 10 a.m., their official vehicles drawing attention from residents who gathered in the lobby. Robert provided his documentation to the lead inspector, a gray-haired woman whose weathered expression suggested she'd seen every possible violation during her career. "You compiled all this yourself?" she asked, examining his detailed reports. "Yes, I've maintained this building for 4 years. These issues began when Peterson Development purchased the property." She nodded noncommittally. "We'll conduct a thorough inspection. If violations are found, appropriate citations will be issued." The inspection team dispersed throughout the building, focusing particularly on the electrical systems Robert had flagged. Peterson arrived 20 minutes later, accompanied by a man Robert recognized as the company's attorney. Their whispered conference with one inspector immediately raised warning flags. Robert's phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number, Southwest Stairwell. Now. He found the lead inspector waiting there, her expression guarded. "Mr. Morgan, I'll be direct. My team is finding exactly what your documentation indicated: counterfeit components, substandard materials, numerous code violations that create dangerous conditions." Relief flooded through Robert immediately, followed by suspicion about this clandestine conversation. "That's good, isn't it? The violations will be documented and addressed." The inspector's mouth tightened. "Ordinarily, yes. But Peterson's attorney is already suggesting your documentation was fabricated out of retaliation for termination. There's also pressure coming from within the department to minimize findings. The materials are physically present. How can that be disputed? Some violations might be attributed to supplier error rather than deliberate negligence. Others might be classified as minor infractions requiring correction but not preventing renovation." She held his gaze steadily. "You understand what I'm saying?" Robert understood perfectly. The system was already working to dilute his evidence to create plausible deniability for Peterson, while allowing the dangerous renovation to proceed with minimal disruption. "What can be done?" The inspector glanced toward the door. "Independent verification from a recognized authority would make it harder to dismiss these findings. Someone whose reputation can't be easily attacked." Before Robert could respond, the door opened, revealing Peterson's attorney scanning the stairwell with suspicious eyes. "Inspector Davis. The team has questions about the Eastern Section assessment." As they left, Robert remained in the stairwell, confronting the reality that documentation alone wouldn't suffice. The system was designed to protect powerful interests, and Peterson's connections were actively working to neutralize the inspection findings. This time, Robert didn't hesitate. He called Victoria directly. The phone answered on the second ring. "Harrington? The inspection is happening now, but there's a problem. Peterson's attorney is already working to minimize the findings. The lead inspector suggested we need independent verification from someone with unassailable credentials." Victoria's response was immediate and focused. "Dr. Alan Nakamura, our head of engineering, will be there within 40 minutes. He's certified as an expert witness in 3 states and has testified before congressional committees on building safety standards." The efficiency of her response, no questions, no hesitation, just immediate action, momentarily took Robert's breath away. "Thank you. There's something else you should know. Peterson fired me Monday and threatened to make me unhireable in Chicago." A brief silence followed, then, "I see. We'll address that after securing the inspection. Eviction timeline. End of the week." Another pause, this one carrying a different quality, less strategic calculation, more genuine concern. "Do you and Abby have somewhere to go?" The question hit Robert with unexpected force, not just its practical implications, but the fact that Victoria had immediately thought of Abby. "We'll figure something out. A colleague might have space temporarily." "That's unacceptable," Victoria replied, her tone shifting to the decisive cadence he recognized from their first meeting. "I own a building on Wellington Avenue with a vacant 2-bedroom. It's yours for as long as needed." The offer dangled between them, generous, necessary, and fraught with implications about their evolving relationship. Robert found himself at a crossroads, pride wrestling with pragmatism, while Abby's welfare hung in the balance. I can't accept Charity, Victoria. Using her first name felt significant, a subtle shift in their dynamic. It's not charity, it's a practical solution to a temporary problem. Victoria paused, then added more quietly, it's what someone would do for a friend. The word friend lingered between them, neither fully accurate nor entirely wrong. A placeholder for something neither seemed ready to define more precisely. I'll pay market rent, Robert insisted, compromise emerging from necessity. We can discuss terms later. For now, focus on the inspection. Dr. Nakamura is already en route. True to Victoria's word, Doctor. Nakamura arrived 40 minutes later, his credentials immediately altering the inspection's dynamic. By late afternoon, the team had documented 17 critical safety violations, each photographed, measured, and verified by Nakamura. Peterson's fury was palpable, but contained in the presence of witnesses, his attorney's expression growing increasingly grim. The lead inspector approached Robert as her team finished. The violations will be filed today. Peterson Development will receive a stop work order until all issues are addressed with approved materials and verified by follow-up inspection. It was a significant victory, yet Robert felt no triumph, only relief that vulnerable residents wouldn't be endangered by corporate greed. As the inspection team departed, Peterson cornered him in the lobby, voice lowered to avoid being overheard. You think you've won. This building will still be converted. The violations will be addressed, the renovation will proceed, and the tenants will still be priced out. All you've done is delay the inevitable while destroying your own career. There was truth in Peterson's assessment. The inspection hadn't solved the underlying problem of affordable housing. Being eliminated only ensured the new units wouldn't be death traps. The victory was partial at best, and the personal cost remained substantial. Dr. Nakamura approached as Peterson stormed away. Ms. Harrington asked me to provide this. He handed Robert an envelope. She also mentioned that my department has an opening for someone with your practical knowledge of building systems. The position begins January 2nd, if you're interested. The casual job offer, delivered as an afterthought, reflected Victoria's distinctive approach, providing opportunities rather than charity, respecting Robert's expertise while acknowledging his predicament. Thank you for coming today, Robert replied, accepting the envelope. Your credentials made a significant difference in how the inspection findings were documented. Nakamura nodded, his expression suggesting he'd witnessed similar scenarios before. Corporate developers often rely on procedural delays and political connections to circumvent safety regulations. Having credible third-party verification closes those loopholes. He offered his business card. Call my office tomorrow about the position. Ms. Harrington speaks highly of your practical knowledge, a perspective our theoretical team sometimes lacks. After Nakamura departed, Robert opened the envelope, finding a key and an address on Wellington Avenue, along with a brief note in Victoria's precise handwriting. Available immediately, terms negotiable. Abby's school is within walking distance. The consideration reflected in that final detail, researching Abby's school location relative to the apartment, struck Robert with unexpected force. Victoria Harrington, whose time was valued in thousands of dollars per hour, had personally considered Abby's daily routine before offering housing. That evening, after explaining the day's developments to Abby in age-appropriate terms, Robert took her to see the Wellington Avenue apartment. The building was modest by Victoria's standards, not luxury condominiums, but well-maintained units in a diverse neighborhood. The apartment itself was clean and functional, recently renovated, with quality materials rather than flashy upgrades. Abby explored the space with growing excitement, her initial wariness giving way to enthusiasm when she discovered the second bedroom had a large desk perfectly positioned beside a window overlooking a small community garden. Dad, this desk is perfect for building my bridge model. The light is amazing. Her joy momentarily eclipsed the circumstances that had necessitated their move, her resilience once again humbling Robert. So you like it? He asked, watching her take precise steps to measure the room's dimensions, a habit that always emerged in new spaces. It's bigger than our old apartment, and no weird smell from the radiators. She paused, sudden understanding crossing her features. Is this because you stood up to Mr. Peterson about the dangerous wires? Robert sat beside her on the window seat, never shielding her from reality, but framing it to prevent unnecessary fear. Partly. Mr. Peterson wasn't unhappy that I reported the safety problems. But this apartment belongs to Ms. Ryan Harrington, and she's letting us stay here while I find a new job. Abby considered this with the serious analysis she applied to all problems. Is she doing it because she likes you? The question delivered with 9-year-old directness caught Robert completely off guard. What makes you ask that? The way she looked at you at her laboratory. Like she was trying to figure out a really interesting puzzle. Abby shrugged. Plus, she keeps helping us, and you keep trying not to accept the help. And it's kind of like this movie we watched in social studies about Pride and Prejudice. Robert couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising them both. I think Ms. Harrington is just being kind, Abs. Sometimes people do nice things without romantic motivations. If you say so. Abby's tone carried exaggerated skepticism that only children can perfect. Can we stay here, though? It's really nice and it's only 12 blocks from school. I counted on the map. Looking at his daughter's hopeful expression, Robert felt the last of his resistance crumbling. They needed this apartment not just physically, but emotionally. The stability it offered would allow Abby to focus on her engineering competition rather than worrying about their living situation. Yes, we can stay. I'll work out the details with Ms. Harrington. Good, Abby nodded decisively, because my bridge model needs a stable environment for perform and adhesive to cure properly. Later that night, and after settling Abby in her new room, Robert finally called Victoria. Their conversation was brief but significant, Robert insisting on paying fair market rent, Victoria countering with a figure below market, but not insultingly low, both finding compromise in a month-to-month arrangement that preserved Robert's independence while acknowledging the reality of their situation. Over the next week, as they settled into the Wellington Avenue apartment, Robert accepted Dr. Nakamura's job offer starting January 2nd as a practical systems consultant for Harrington Technologies Engineering Division. The position utilized his hands-on knowledge while offering a substantial salary increase and benefits package that would finally allow him to provide Abby with braces and start a college savings account. Through Victoria's quiet intervention, Mrs. Kaplan's situation had been resolved, a place secured at a senior living community that honored her existing rent through a legacy resident program that Robert suspected had been created specifically for her benefit. The Rodriguez family found affordable housing through a community organization that happened to receive substantial funding from the Harrington Foundation. The transition wasn't seamless, ride still occasionally conflicted with pragmatism, independence with interdependence, but Robert found himself adapting to this new reality with growing comfort. Victoria remained professionally distant during this period, their communication limited to practical matters regarding the apartment and occasional updates about Abby's bridge design. December 21st arrived with Chicago's worst blizzard in decades. Wind howled through city streets, snow accumulated at rates that overwhelmed plowing efforts, and temperatures plummeted to dangerous levels. By Saturday evening, power outages affected multiple neighborhoods, including Wellington Avenue. Robert had prepared for such possibilities, stocking emergency supplies and reinforcing the apartment's weatherproofing. He and Abby made an adventure of the situation, building a blanket fort in the living room and using camping lantern to create pools of warm light in the darkness. It's like we're explorers in the Arctic, Abby declared, wrapped in layers of blankets as Robert heated soup on a camping stove. Do you think the power will come back soon? Hard to say. Crews are working, but the storm is making repairs difficult. Robert checked his phone, finding service increasingly unreliable as cell towers switched to backup power. We're fine, though. Plenty of food, warm blankets, in each other's company. Abby nodded seriously. The most essential resources. A knock at the door interrupted their polar expedition. Robert opened it to find Victoria standing in the hallway, snowflakes melting in her hair, her usual elegant attire replaced by practical winter gear that somehow still managed to look designer quality. The building's backup generator failed, she stated without preamble. The management company can't get a repair crew here until morning due to road conditions. I've brought additional supplies. She held up a bag containing what appeared to be high-end camping equipment. Robert stared at her, momentarily speechless. You drove here, in this blizzard. I have a vehicle equipped for these conditions. Victoria glanced past him, noticing Abby's blanket fort illuminated by lantern light. Something in her expression softened. I see you're already well prepared. Dad always keeps emergency supplies, Abby called from her fort. He says it's better to have things you don't need than need things you don't have. A practical philosophy. Victoria remained in the doorway, seeming suddenly uncertain despite having navigated a blizzard without hesitation. If you're adequately supplied, I won't intrude. The formality in her tone struck Robert as oddly vulnerable. Victoria Harrington, billionaire CEO, accustomed to commanding rooms waiting for permission to enter an apartment she technically owned. Please come in, Robert offered, stepping aside. We have plenty of soup, and Abby was just about to challenge me to a card game she claims I can't win. Victoria entered, removing her snow-covered boots with unexpected domesticity. Abby emerged from her fort curiosity, overcoming shyness. Did you really drive through the blizzard just to check on us? I was concerned about the generator failure, Victoria replied, her usual precision softening as she addressed Abby directly. Wellington Avenue is an older building. The heating systems aren't as reliable as they should be during extended power outages. You could have called, Robert pointed out, the observation free of accusation, merely noting the incongruity between a simple phone call and braving a historic blizzard. Victoria hesitated, the uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing her features. Cell service is becoming unreliable. In some situations, warrant direct verification rather than remote monitoring. The explanation was logical yet incomplete, leaving unspoken motivations hanging in the air between them. Robert recognized something in her expression. He'd never expected to see Victoria Harrington was lonely on a stormy night before Christmas, drawn to the only people in Chicago who occupied the undefined space between professional connection and personal relationship. We're glad you came, he said simply, acknowledging her unspoken reasons without requiring her to articulate them. Abby was just explaining how her bridge design distributes tension through multiple points rather than centralized support. Victoria's posture relaxed slightly, professional confidence, returning as the conversation shifted to engineering principles. An innovative approach. Have you considered how that affects load-bearing capacity during asymmetrical stress? Abby's eyes widened with delight at being addressed as a peer rather than a child. That's exactly what I've been testing, Dad. Help me build a stress simulation platform from hardware store materials. As Abby led Victoria to examine her bridge model, temporarily set up on the apartment's dining table, Robert observed their interaction with quiet amazement. Victoria Harrington, who commanded boardrooms and managed billion-dollar acquisitions, listened to a 9-year-old's engineering theories with genuine interest and engagement, offering suggestions that respected Abby's knowledge while gently expanding her understanding. The three of them spent the evening in unexpected harmony, sharing soup, heated on the camping stove, playing card games by lantern light, and eventually gravitating toward the blanket fort when the apartment's temperature began to drop as the power outage continued. I haven't been in a blanket fort since I was about 6, Victoria admitted, as she somewhat awkwardly joined them in the improvised shelter. My brother and I used to build them when our parents were away on business trips. You have a brother? Abby asked, surprised. Is he an engineer too? A shadow crossed Victoria's expression. No, Michael works in venture capital now. We don't see much of each other. Robert recognized the careful phrasing that concealed deeper pain, the brother who had betrayed her early business efforts, as she'd mentioned during their dinner at Bordeaux Hall. Before he could change the subject, Abby pressed forward with innocent curiosity. Why not families should stick together, especially at Christmas? Victoria's gaze met Robert's, briefly seeking guidance on how to address such direct questioning. He nodded slightly, encouraging honesty without unnecessary detail. Sometimes people make choices that make it difficult to maintain close relationships, Victoria explained carefully. My brother and I had a disagreement about business ethics many years ago. We haven't resolved our differences. That's sad, Abby declared with characteristic directness. Dad says family arguments are like bridge designs. If the tension isn't properly distributed, the whole structure fails. The analogy startled a genuine laugh from Victoria, a warm, unguarded sound Robert had never heard before. Your father has a remarkable way of applying practical wisdom to complex situations. As the evening progressed, the temperature in the apartment continued to drop, despite their efforts to conserve heat. Abby eventually fell asleep within the blanket fort, wrapped in multiple layers and using her father's rolled-up coat as a pillow. Victoria and Robert sat in companionable silence, watching Abby sleep with the peaceful abandon only children can achieve during crises. The lantern light cast soft shadows across their faces, creating an intimate atmosphere that seemed to exist outside normal time and circumstance. She's remarkable, Victoria observed quietly. Her resilience, her analytical mind, her emotional intelligence. You've done an extraordinary job raising her alone. I can't take all the credit. Jennifer established a strong foundation. Robert adjusted the blanket over Abby's shoulders. And Abby herself is naturally determined. Always has been. Still, the environment you've created for her, the stability, the encouragement, the balance between practical reality and optimism. That's not accidental. The compliment carried weight coming from someone who rarely offered praise without strategic purpose. Robert found himself studying Victoria's profile in the lantern light, noting how different she appeared in this setting, less the formidable CEO, more the woman who had driven through a blizzard to ensure a child's safety. Why did you really come tonight, Victoria? The question emerged without planning, direct but not confrontational. Victoria remained silent for several moments, her gaze still on Abby's sleeping form. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability Robert had glimpsed only in fragments before. I was concerned about the generator failure. That part was true. She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. But I could have sent someone to check. I could have called the building manager. There were more efficient options than personally driving through a blizzard. She turned to face him directly, the lantern light, illuminating eyes that held unexpected honesty. The truth is, when I thought about you and Abby alone in a powerless building on the coldest night of the year, I couldn't focus on anything else. I needed to see for myself that you were both safe. The admission hung between them. Not a declaration of defined feelings, but the acknowledgement of connection that transcended their initial arrangement. Robert recognized the courage it had taken Victoria to articulate even this much, to allow herself this small vulnerability after years of calculated self-protection. I'm glad you came, he said, simply, the words carrying more meaning than their surface simplicity suggested. Victoria nodded, neither pushing for more nor retreating from the moment of honesty. Instead, she shifted the conversation slightly. Abby mentioned her engineering competition is in 4 days. Will her bridge design be ready? Almost. We need to complete the final stress tests and add the decorative elements. She's determined to make it both structurally sound and aesthetically pleasing. Victoria smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her features, form and function in perfect balance. A worthy goal in engineering and in life. The philosophical observation seemed to surprise even Victoria herself, as if she hadn't intended to reveal such personal reflection. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the howling wind outside and Abby's steady breathing. Eventually, Victoria checked her watch, a subtle gesture that reminded Robert of their first meeting at Bordeaux Hall. I should go. The snow has likely accumulated significantly since I arrived. You shouldn't drive in these conditions. Robert countered, practicality overriding any awkwardness about suggesting she stay. The guest room has extra blankets, or you're welcome to the couch. Either would be safer than navigating unplowed streets in a blizzard. Victoria hesitated, clearly torn between self-sufficiency and common sense. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition to keep a friend safe during a historic storm. Robert's use of friend was deliberate, echoing her earlier categorization of their relationship while acknowledging its evolution. Victoria's expression shifted subtly at the words, something unreadable passing through her eyes. After a moment, she nodded. Thank you. The couch will be fine. Robert gathered additional blankets while Victoria sent several messages on her phone, presumably rearranging whatever Sunday morning obligations awaited Chicago's most powerful CEO. The domesticity of preparing sleeping arrangements in the lantern light carried a strange intimacy, as if the blizzard had temporarily suspended the normal rules governing their complicated dynamic. I haven't had an actual sleepover since college, Victoria remarked with unexpected lightness as she accepted the blankets. Though I suspect your couch is more comfortable than the dormitory floor was back then. The glimpse into her past, Victoria Harrington participating in normal collegiate experiences, rather than emerging fully formed as a corporate titan, reminded Robert of the human being beneath the power and influence that typically defined her. If Abby wakes up and finds you still here in the morning, be prepared for relentless questioning, he warned with a smile. She's been developing theories about our relationship that would make Jane Austen proud. Victoria's eyebrow arched with amused curiosity. Oh, and what conclusions has your daughter drawn? That you're helping us because you like me, not just out of general kindness. Robert kept his tone light, though the statement carried weight they both recognized. She apparently observed you looking at me like an interesting puzzle during our visit to your laboratory. To his surprise, Victoria didn't dismiss Abby's observation with a corporate deflection or change the subject. Instead, she considered it thoughtfully. Children often perceive dynamics adults try to obscure, even from themselves. And the response acknowledged something neither had directly addressed, that their connection had evolved beyond professional collaboration or casual acquaintance into territory neither seemed ready to explicitly define. Abby has always been perceptive. Robert agreed, allowing the conversation to rest in that ambiguous space rather than forcing clarity neither was prepared to articulate. Morning arrived with blindingly bright sunlight, reflecting off pristine snow. Power remained out, but the apartment had retained enough heat to remain comfortable with layers of clothing and blankets. Robert woke to find Victoria and Abby already deep in conversation at the dining table, examining the bridge model with serious concentration. Dad Ms. Harrington figured out why the center section keeps failing under asymmetrical load. Abby's excitement suggested she'd been awake for some time. We need to adjust the tension distribution through the secondary supports. Victoria looked up, her usual perfect appearance slightly softened by sleep and the absence of makeup. Something about seeing her this way engaged with Abby's project in morning light. Wearing yesterday's clothes, her corporate armor temporarily set aside, struck Robert with unexpected force. Your daughter has a remarkable intuitive understanding of structural engineering principles. Victoria noted, her tone carrying genuine respect rather than adult condescension. She just needed a different perspective on the load distribution problem. The scene before him, his daughter and Victoria Harrington collaborating on a bridge design in a powerless apartment during a historic blizzard, seemed surreal yet somehow right, as if disparate elements of his life had aligned in ways he could never have anticipated. Dad, can Ms. Harrington come to my competition on Wednesday? Abby asked the question carrying both hope and uncertainty. She understands the mathematical principles even better than my science teacher. The invitation represented more than attendance at a school event. It was Abby actively including Victoria in a significant moment, drawing her further into their family circle, despite the undefined nature of her relationship with Robert. Victoria glanced at Robert, clearly unwilling to accept without his approval. I wouldn't want to intrude on your family event. Before Robert could respond, Abby interjected with the straightforward logic of childhood. But you're already kind of like family now. You gave us a place to live, you helped fix my bridge design, and you had a sleepover during the blizzard. The declaration hung in the air, neither adult immediately capable of addressing its implications. Victoria's expression revealed rare uncertainty, while Robert found himself considering how quickly Victoria had indeed become an important presence in their lives. If your schedule permits, we'd be happy to have you there. Robert finally offered the invitation genuine, despite its careful phrasing. Victoria's professional mask briefly reasserted itself as she checked her phone, a gesture that seemed almost habitual rather than necessary. I have a board meeting that morning, but I could certainly attend the afternoon competition session. The acceptance, delivered with characteristic precision yet underlying warmth, sealed something unspoken between them. An acknowledgement that whatever was developing here deserved exploration rather than avoidance. Power returned to Wellington Avenue shortly before noon, civilization reasserting itself through humming appliances and functioning heat. Victoria departed once road conditions improved, her SUV's specialized tires handling the snow-covered streets with the same efficiency she applied to all challenges. The days before Abby's competition passed quickly, Robert dividing his time between settling into their new apartment, preparing for his January start date at Harrington Technologies, and helping Abby perfect her bridge model. Victoria remained involved from a distance, sending occasional suggestions via text, and once having specialized materials delivered when Abby encountered an unexpected structural problem. On December 25th, Christmas morning, Robert and Abby exchanged modest gifts, books for her, a new tool set for him, before spending the day watching holiday movies and baking cookies from Jennifer's old recipe. A delivery arrived mid-afternoon, a package from Victoria containing an advanced engineering kit for Abby and a rare single malt scotch for Robert, with a simple note: Merry Christmas to you both. Thank you for the blanket, Fort memories. V. The gesture was perfectly calibrated, thoughtful, without being extravagant, personal, without being presumptuous. That evening, Robert sent a text, "Thank you for the gifts. They were perfect. Merry Christmas, Victoria." Her response came quickly, "You are both welcome. Enjoy the holiday." The exchange was brief, almost formal, yet carried an undercurrent of growing connection that neither seemed ready to articulate more directly. December 26th brought a return to preparation for Abby's competition. The bridge model was finally complete, a marvel of engineering principles applied through a child's innovative perspective, strengthened by Victoria's insights about tension distribution. As they carefully packed it for transport, Abby's nervous excitement was palpable. What if it doesn't hold the test weight? What if I forget my presentation? Her usual confidence momentarily wavered beneath competition pressure. Then you'll have learned something valuable for next time. Robert replied the answer he knew Jennifer would have given. The goal isn't perfection, Abs. It's progress. The morning of December 27th arrived with clear skies and temperatures slightly above freezing, a welcome respite from Chicago's winter fury. Robert and Abby reached the Museum of Science and Industry by 11:00 a.m., securing their assigned station and carefully setting up the bridge model that represented countless hours of collaborative effort. Robert noticed his daughter's nervous energy, checking and rechecking measurements, adjusting display elements, rehearsing her presentation under her breath. "Remember what Mom used to say before your piano recitals?" he asked quietly, helping her arrange the project documentation. Abby smiled, the memory clearly comforting. "Butterflies mean you care enough to be nervous. Just make sure they're flying in formation." "Exactly. Your bridge is amazing, Abs. No matter what happens today, I'm incredibly proud of you." The competition opened to the public at noon, judges circulating among projects while families and spectators explored the exhibits. Robert maintained a reassuring presence nearby as Abby explained her design to the first round of judges, her initial nervousness giving way to confident enthusiasm as she demonstrated the innovative tension distribution system. Victoria arrived at precisely 2:15 p.m. directly from her board meeting, still wearing a tailored suit that marked her as distinctly different from the casual weekend attire of other attendees. Her entrance drew attention, several parents whispering recognition as she moved purposefully through the exhibition hall. She reached their station during a break between judging rounds, her expression warming as she took in Abby's professional display and confident posture. "This looks impressive. How has the judging gone so far?" Abby launched into a detailed analysis of the judges' questions and her responses as technical terminology flowing easily as she explained structural principles that would challenge many adults. Victoria listened attentively, offering a suggestion for the final judging round that Abby immediately incorporated into her presentation strategy. Robert observed their interaction with quiet amazement, his daughter and Victoria Harrington discussing engineering concepts as peers, despite the 33-year age difference between them. Something about witnessing this connection, Victoria's brilliant mind engaging with Abby's developing intellect, without condescension or simplification, affected Robert more deeply than he'd anticipated. The final judging round began at 3:30 with each finalist given 5 minutes to present their project to the complete panel. Abby's turn came third, her voice steady as she explained how her bridge design distributed tension through multiple points rather than centralized support, allowing for greater stability during asymmetrical stress conditions. When a judge asked about real-world applications, Abby confidently referenced the Millau Viaduct in France and the Akashi Kaikyo Bridge in Japan, demonstrating knowledge that clearly exceeded the panel's expectations for a fourth grader. Her final demonstration, applying progressive weight to different sections of the model to show its resilience, drew appreciative nods from the engineering professors on the panel. As Abby returned to their station after her presentation, both Robert and Victoria offered quiet congratulations, their shared pride creating a moment of unexpected unity. The award ceremony wouldn't occur for another hour, leaving time for them to explore other exhibits together. Walking through the museum's extensive exhibits, Robert found himself watching Victoria's interactions with Abby. The respectful attention she gave to a child's observations, the way she expanded concepts without oversimplifying, her genuine engagement with Abby's perspective rather than merely humoring her. Each interaction revealed dimensions of Victoria that contradicted her public reputation for coldness and detachment. When the announcement came for participants to return for the awards ceremony, Victoria hesitated, suddenly appearing uncertain of her place in this family moment. Perhaps I should give you both space for this part. It's really a parent-child occasion. Before Robert could respond, Abby grasped Victoria's hand with the unself-conscious directness of childhood. But you helped design the tension distribution system. You're part of our team now. The simple declaration seemed to affect Victoria deeply, her usual composure momentarily wavering as she allowed herself to be led back toward the competition area. Robert followed, struck by the image before him, his brilliant daughter holding the hand of one of America's most powerful CEOs, both of them connected by shared passion for engineering and the bridges they had begun to build between their disparate worlds. The award ceremony began with recognition of all participants, followed by honorable mentions and third place. When the head judge announced, second place goes to Abby Morgan for her innovative tension distribution bridge design, Robert felt a surge of pride so intense it momentarily took his breath away. Abby's face lit with disbelief and joy as she stepped forward to receive her certificate and scholarship to Northwestern University's summer engineering program. As she returned to where Robert and Victoria waited, her expression reflected pure triumph. I did it. I actually did it. She clutched the certificate, looking from Robert to Victoria with shining eyes. We did it. Our design worked. Your design, Victoria corrected gently, unexpected emotion evident in her voice. Your innovation, your presentation, your achievement. We just helped with the edges. The award ceremony concluded with photographs and congratulations from judges and other participants. As they prepared to leave, Victoria received a call that required immediate attention, a situation with the Stellaris acquisition that couldn't wait. She excused herself with genuine regret, promising to check in later. Robert and Abby celebrated with dinner at Abby's favorite pizza place, the certificate propped prominently on their table. Their conversation was animated by Abby's excited recounting of judges' comments and her plans for future projects, her confidence visibly strengthened by the achievement. Dad, Abby asked as they walked home through streets still bearing remnants of the weekend's blizzard, do you like Ms. Harrington? Robert considered his answer carefully. Yes, I do. She's intelligent, principled, and genuinely interested in your engineering abilities. No, I mean, do you like her? Like how you liked Mom? The question caught him off guard despite its predictability. It's complicated, Abs. Ms. Harrington and I come from very different worlds. But bridges connect different worlds, Abby replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. That's literally what they're for. Robert smiled at her logic, unable to argue with the metaphor. That's true, but adult relationships are complex. They're only complex because adults make them complex, Abby stated with absolute certainty. You both smile different when you're together. The real kind of smile, not the polite kind. Her observation lingered in Robert's mind as they reached the Wellington Avenue apartment. After Abby was asleep, her certificate prominently displayed on her desk, Robert found himself on the small balcony, despite the cold, staring at the city lights while turning his daughter's words over in his mind. His phone vibrated with a text from Victoria. Acquisition emergency resolved. Congratulations again to Abby on her achievement. She was exceptional today. Robert hesitated, then responded more personally than he might have before the blizzard. Thank you for being there. It meant a lot to her, to us both. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared, suggesting Victoria was drafting and redrafting her response. Finally, the pleasure was mine. Her achievement deserved celebration. You've raised an extraordinary daughter, Robert. He smiled at the formality that still characterized her message's evidence of her careful nature. Would you like to join us for dinner this weekend? Abby wants to celebrate with her team, and apparently that includes you now. This time the Victoria's response came quickly. I'd like that very much. Something shifted with that simple acceptance, a mutual acknowledgement that whatever was developing between them deserved exploration beyond crisis response and professional cooperation. Robert found himself smiling at the city lights, the future holding possibilities he hadn't dared consider since Jennifer's death. His phone vibrated once more. Robert, the construction inspector called. Mrs. Kaplan's apartment has been modified with senior accessibility features. She can move in next week. The message confirmed what Robert had suspected. Victoria had been quietly ensuring Mrs. Kaplan could return to her home of 47 years, likely applying pressure or incentives that had convinced Peterson Development to maintain at least one unit as affordable housing. "Thank you," he replied simply, "for everything." Her final message of the evening carried a new openness. "You once told me building walls high enough to keep out pain also keeps out everything worth living for. I'm learning you were right." Standing on the balcony under the winter stars, Robert realized that despite all the upheaval of the past month, losing his job, moving, starting over, he felt more hopeful than he had in years. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since Jennifer's death, that uncertainty held promise rather than just challenge. The bridges being built weren't just between the different worlds he and Victoria inhabited, but between past and future, between loss and possibility, between isolation and connection. His brilliant daughter had been right again. Bridges existed to connect different worlds to make passage possible, where gaps once seemed insurmountable. As 2024 approached, Robert Morgan found himself standing at the beginning of a path he hadn't expected. A path illuminated not just by Victoria Harrington's considerable resources, but by the genuine connection developing between three people from vastly different circumstances who had somehow found common ground in mutual respect, shared values, and the bridges they were learning to build together.